When you think of the legend of Zelda, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the gleaming Master Sword resting in its pedestal, the golden Triforce shimmering with ancient power, or Link's iconic green tunic billowing in the wind. But beyond these symbols lies something far more profound. A series that didn't just entertain generations of players, but fundamentally transformed what video games could be. Over the next few hours, we'll journey through the moments that defined this legendary franchise, from its revolutionary birth to its constant reinvention. These aren't merely great gaming memories. They're the instances when boundaries were shattered, risks were taken, and the entire medium evolved. So let's return to where it all began, to a time when adventure meant something entirely new. In 1986, the video game landscape was vastly different than today. Home consoles were recovering from the North American crash of 1983. Games were simple, arcade ports or straightforward platformers with clear beginnings and ends. Players moved left to right, defeated enemies, reached goals, and started the next level. The formula was established, comfortable, seemingly unchangeable. Then came Shigeru Miyamoto with an idea that would alter gaming forever. Born from childhood memories of exploring the countryside around Kyoto, discovering caves and lakes without maps, he wanted to capture that pure joy of venturing into the unknown. The result was The Legend of Zelda, arriving on the Famicom Disk System in February 1986 before reaching North America later that year. What made Zelda revolutionary wasn't just gameplay, but philosophy, and players took control of Link and were dropped into Hyrule with almost no guidance. An old man in a cave gave you a sword with those iconic words, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." From that moment, you were free to explore, experiment, fail, and find your own path. The non-linear structure was unprecedented. You weren't navigating a single interconnected structure, but an entire overworld filled with secrets rewarding curiosity. Bomb a wall, find rupees, burn a bush, discover stairs. The game trusted players to experiment, to engage with the world as a place of endless possibility. The dungeon design complemented this perfectly. 9 labyrinths presented unique challenges, each with distinct architecture. While the first was accessible and later ones increasingly complex, nothing prevented tackling them out of order. Items served dual purposes. The bow hit switches, the ladder crossed water, the candle revealed passages. Each discovery expanded understanding of what was possible. The golden cartridge became part of the legend. When most games came in gray, Zelda's gold case stood out like treasure. Combined with battery backup saves, revolutionary when most games used passwords, it represented a premium experience too grand for conventional limitations. "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this," has endured nearly 4 decades. This simple phrase represents the threshold when players step from safety into mystery, acknowledging the journey ahead requires both tools and ingenuity. The game sold over 6.5 million copies, proving players wanted exploration and discovery over linear experiences. Yet the Nintendo Entertainment System's limitations meant a relatively small overworld and simple graphics. The series needed a game showing what Zelda could be with more power and lessons learned. That game arrived 5 years later on the Super Nintendo. A Link to the Past, released in 1991 in Japan and 1992 in North America, represented the full realization of what Zelda promised. Built for 16-bit hardware, it expanded every aspect while maintaining core exploration philosophy. The leap to 16-bit allowed unprecedented detail. Hyrule became a vast, interconnected world with lush graphics. Rain fell in sheets during the opening as Link rescued Zelda. Dungeons featured multiple floors and visual themes, making each memorable. But A Link to the Past's greatest innovation was the Dark World. Halfway through, after claiming the Master Sword, players discovered Hyrule existed in two parallel dimensions. The Light World was familiar Hyrule. The Dark World was a corrupted mirror where locations were transformed. The castle became a pyramid. Villages became swamps. Link himself transformed into a pink rabbit until acquiring the Moon Pearl. This dual structure gave physical form to the struggle between light and darkness. Switching between worlds via the magic mirror became central to progression. A blocked light world path might be open in the dark world. The structure wasn't just doubling content, but serving narrative. The Master Sword's introduction established it as the series' most iconic weapon. Unlike the original, where Link simply found stronger swords, here the blade was steeped in lore. It slept in a forest pedestal, awaiting a worthy hero. Link proved his worth, collecting 3 pendants, demonstrating courage, wisdom, and power. When Link grasped the hilt and raised the blade as lightning crackled around him, it wasn't just a weapon upgrade. It was transformation from boy to hero. The game fleshed out Ganon's backstory. The opening explained how thieves discovered the sacred realm and its Triforce. Their leader, Ganondorf, murdered his companions and claimed it, his evil heart transforming both himself and the realm. This gave context and weight to the adventure. Emotional resonance began immediately with Uncle's sacrifice. Within minutes, Link's uncle died passing his sword, establishing that heroism demanded sacrifice. The 7 maidens imprisoned throughout the Dark World added depth, each with personality and backstory. Princess Zelda was revealed as the 7th maiden, giving her an active role beyond damsel. The dungeon design set standards persisting today. 12 major dungeons featured distinct themes, unique items, and multi-floor layouts rewarding spatial reasoning. Each created memorable experiences players would recall decades later. The original Zelda planted revolutionary seeds. A Link to the Past nurtured them into full bloom, creating a masterpiece defining not just a franchise but a genre. Together, they established principles echoing through gaming: trust players to explore, reward curiosity, embed narrative in environment, and never stop innovating even when formulas seem perfect. As the Super Nintendo era closed and Nintendo prepared for the Nintendo 64, the question loomed: could Zelda make the leap to 3D while maintaining what made it special? The answer would come in 1998, changing not just Zelda, but interactive entertainment itself. 1998 marked a pivotal moment in gaming. The industry stood at a transformative threshold, 2-dimensional sprites giving way to polygonal worlds in real-time 3D. Sony's PlayStation demonstrated 3D gaming's viability, while Nintendo prepared to prove their franchises could transition without sacrificing beloved qualities. The Legend of Zelda. Ocarina of Time arrived November 21, 1998. Directed by Yoshiaki Koizumi, Yoichi Yamada, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Toru Osawa, with Koji Kondo's musical score, it represented 5 years of development and careful consideration of preserving Zelda's essence while embracing new possibilities. The opening established both continuity and evolution. Players watched the camera soar over Hyrule Field before shifting to Kokiri Forest, where Link slept fitfully. The great Deku Tree called to Navi, sending her to partner with the fairy-less boy. These opening minutes, rendered in 3D cutscenes, demonstrated Zelda's transition would elevate storytelling to cinematic heights. But what happened after the great Deku Tree dungeon created gaming's most memorable moments. As Link exited Kokiri Forest through a narrow tree tunnel, the screen faded to black. When it returned, Link stood at the edge of vast, open space stretching to the horizon. This was Hyrule Field, and the moment was breathtaking. Hyrule Field wasn't just large, it felt genuinely vast, existing beyond what the eye immediately perceived. Mountains rose in the distance. Lon Lon Ranch was visible as small structures requiring real-time walking to reach. Hyrule Castle stood centrally, simultaneously destination and landmark. The draw distance created scale that changed how players thought about game worlds. What made this transcend technical achievement was emotional impact. For players who'd grown up with A Link to the Past's comprehensible connected screens, this represented something unprecedented, a fundamental shift in how space could be perceived. The horizon existed. The sky arched overhead. The day-night cycle meant the sun would arc, shadows lengthening as nocturnal enemies emerged. The freedom was intoxicating. Nothing forced a particular direction. Hyrule Castle beckoned centrally, but players could strike toward Lon Lon Ranch or attempt reaching distant mountains. The game gently guided through soft barriers, but in that first moment, possibilities felt limitless. Epona deepened this freedom. Mounted, the experience transformed. The wind rushed past, the ground blurred beneath pounding hooves. Riding across Hyrule Field, at sunset became pure gaming magic, where technical achievement, art direction, and player emotion aligned perfectly. Yet even as Ocarina revolutionized open-world design, its most impactful moment came from contraction, the intimate rather than vast. This occurred in the Temple of Time at what seemed like midpoint, redefining how games could use time narratively. Link's quest to enter the sacred realm required collecting 3 spiritual stones. The Kokiri Emerald came from the great Deku Tree. The Goron Ruby was earned stopping Volvagia. Princess Ruto entrusted the Zora Sapphire after Link saved her. With all 3, and having learned melodies on his ocarina, Link returned to the Temple of Time. The temple interior was serene, almost church-like. Link approached where the Master Sword waited. He played the Song of Time. The door opened, and he stood before the legendary blade. He grasped the hilt and pulled. The sword slid free with resonating sound. Link held it aloft as light surrounded him. For players expecting a simple upgrade, what happened next shocked them. The light intensified until filling the screen. When it faded, Link stood in an ethereal chamber where Rauru explained everything. Link had been too young. The Master Sword sealed him for 7 years, keeping his spirit safe while his body aged. 7 years. Link had been unconscious while the world continued. Ganondorf, following behind after Link opened the way, had claimed the Triforce of Power and conquered Hyrule. The quest to prevent disaster had enabled it. When Link awakened in the temple, he was no longer a child. His model was taller, features more mature. Stepping into Castle Town revealed the transformation's scope. The bustling market was gone. Debris scattered across cobblestones. Re-deads shambled through ruins. Everything was wrong. The psychological impact went beyond shock. Players had spent hours knowing Child Hyrule's inhabitants and locations. To have it torn away created genuine loss. Few games managed. The 7-year gap's genius extended beyond drama. Throughout the adventure, Link encountered consequences of missing years. Childhood friends had grown without him. Saria remained the same age, but Link had moved beyond that world. The bittersweet reunion demonstrated Zelda was maturing as storytelling medium. The game allowed temporal navigation using the Master Sword's pedestal. Certain tasks required child Link's size, others demanded adult Link's strength. But more than mechanical function, time travel reinforced the tragedy. Link could never truly return, always carrying knowledge of what was to come. The mysterious Sheik appeared after Link awakened, teaching songs that transported him between locations. The Sheikah warrior moved gracefully, spoke in riddles, always vanishing before questions could be asked. The true identity remained mysterious until another Temple of Time moment. After Link awakened the 5 sages and proved himself hero of time, Sheik summoned him back to the temple for a final lesson. Sheik explained Zelda's lullaby's deeper meaning while being bathed in light. The disguise dissolved. Where Sheik stood, Princess Zelda appeared. The warrior guiding Link had been the princess all along. For players in 1998, this carried significant impact. Clues had been scattered, Sheik's distinctive eye color, songs connected to royalty, timing of appearances. Yet the game never explicitly signaled the twist. The reveal recontextualized every Sheik interaction. Moments that seemed mysterious now carried additional meaning. Zelda hadn't spent 7 years imprisoned and helpless. She'd adapted, trained, disguised herself, ensuring the hero of time would have necessary knowledge and tools. Following the reveal, Ganondorf imprisoned Zelda before Link could react. The villain teleported away. Link stood in the empty temple, the quest's weight settling on his shoulders. The 6 sages urged him to confront Ganondorf and end the darkness. Ganon's castle loomed at ruined Hyrule's center. Inside, Link faced trials testing every skill acquired. The battle with Ganondorf took place high in the tower, elegant combat with Link reflecting magic back using light arrows. When Ganondorf fell, Link and Zelda fled the collapsing castle in spectacular escape. Then the rubble stirred. Ganondorf, using his Triforce piece, transformed into Ganon, a massive beast towering over Link with dual swords. The final battle was chaotic and desperate, raw survival. When Ganon struck with such force that the Master Sword flew from Link's grip, Zelda called out, creating openings with her power. The teamwork culminated here. Link dodged while Zelda's light arrows stunned the beast. In vulnerability moments, Link struck Ganon's glowing tail. After enough coordinated strikes, Ganon collapsed. The Master Sword began glowing. Link retrieved the blade and delivered the final strike, pinning Ganon as Zelda and sages sealed him away. In the sacred realm afterward, Zelda explained the victory's price. To truly restore peace, Link needed to return to his own time, giving up everything experienced. Zelda returned the ocarina. Link placed the Master Sword in its pedestal. Light reversed time, carrying him back 7 years. The ending was bittersweet. Link had saved Hyrule, become the prophesied hero, proven himself worthy. But he could never share experiences, never explain sacrifices, never see adult versions of friends he'd saved. It was mature complexity, respecting players' emotional investment. Ocarina of Time's impact extended beyond narrative. The Z targeting system solved 3D combat challenges. The context-sensitive action button became standard interface design. The dungeon design proved Zelda's puzzle philosophy thrived in 3D. The music as both storytelling device and gameplay mechanic reached its apex. The game sold over 7.5 million copies. Critics awarded near-universal perfect scores. For players experiencing it during release, this represented a watershed moment. The emergence into Hyrule Field, the 7-year shock, Sheik's reveal, the desperate Ganon battle, the bittersweet ending. These weren't just technical achievements. They were moments lingering in memory, recalled with the same fondness as favorite films or novels. In Ocarina of Time's wake, the Zelda team faced an unusual challenge. Nintendo wanted another Nintendo 64 Zelda game, but the console's life cycle was ending. The solution? Reuse Ocarina's engine and assets, but create something entirely different in tone and structure. What if they made a Zelda game about watching the world end again and again until you learned how to stop it? The Legend of Zelda. Majora's Mask released in April 2000 in Japan and October in North America. Developed in approximately 1 year under Eiji Aonuma's direction, it inherited Ocarina's visual style while taking the series in an unanticipated direction. This wasn't just darker. It was a meditation on mortality, inevitability, and the weight of small lives lived in Apocalypse's shadow. Following Ocarina's events, Child Link searched the lost woods for a departed friend, implied to be Navi. In the woods, Link encountered a mysterious figure wearing a strange mask. The Skull Kid, corrupted by Majora's Mask, attacked Link, stole Epona and the Ocarina of Time, and transformed him into a Deku scrub before fleeing into a portal. Link pursued and emerged in Clocktown, central hub of the parallel world of Termina. What Link discovered was civilization on extinction's brink. Above the town, impossibly close and growing closer, hung the moon. But this wasn't serene. It was a grotesque nightmare, a massive sphere with a twisted, screaming face expressing nothing but malice and hunger. The moon was falling, and in 3 days it would obliterate everything. The Skull Kid had summoned this cataclysm, and Clocktown's citizens were beginning to realize their world was ending. The 3-day system was Majora's Mask's revolutionary core mechanic. Time moved continuously in Termina, each of 72 hours lasting approximately 45 seconds real time. Without intervention, players had roughly 54 minutes before the moon crashed down. The game-over sequence showed the moon's final descent, impact, screen-filling explosion, and Link's death along with everyone else. Everything accomplished, every quest, item, relationship was erased, reset to the first day's beginning. The Song of Time, learned early from the happy mask salesman, allowed Link to return to the first day's dawn, resetting before the moon completed its descent. This created a loop structure fundamentally different from any previous Zelda. Link experienced the same 3 days repeatedly, retaining certain key items while the world reset completely. NPCs forgot conversations. Quests returned to starting points. The moon rose again, beginning its slow, inevitable fall. What made this brilliant rather than frustrating was how it served both gameplay and narrative. Mechanically, it allowed developers to create a relatively small world. Termina was compact compared to Hyrule, and fill it with extraordinary density. Every character had schedules spanning 3 days. Events unfolded according to strict timetables players could learn and manipulate. Narratively, the time loop elevated themes of helplessness and heroism. Link was the only person aware of the cycle, the only one remembering previous iterations. He watched people live out final days repeatedly, saw their fear or denial or bravery, and could do nothing to save them all at once. The hero of time was forced to experience his own limitations, understanding even heroes can't be everywhere simultaneously. The final hours represented Majora's Mask's most oppressive period. As the clock struck midnight on the third day, everything changed. The music became minimalist, discordant, utterly haunting, musical dread conveying not just danger but inevitability. Clocktown transformed during these hours. The carnival atmosphere dissolved. Streets emptied as people fled or barricaded themselves. The postman stood paralyzed between duty and survival. Madame Aroma searched desperately for her missing son. The bomb shop owner prepared to flee. The inn owner waited stoically. Romani Ranch offered affecting subplots. Romani spent 3 days trying to protect cows from mysterious beings called them, who would abduct cattle. If Link helped defend the ranch, Romani stayed safe. If he failed or wasn't present, she would be changed, traumatized, speaking monotone, clearly damaged though the game never showed what happened. Cremia's quest to deliver milk before the moon fell provided another window into Apocalypse's human cost. If Link helped defend her wagon from bandits, she rewarded him not with rupees, but an embrace. Genuine human connection facing oblivion. The postman's crisis encapsulated duty versus survival. Throughout 3 days, he followed his route with mechanical precision. In final hours, players witnessed him shaking in the mailroom, torn between job commitment and desire to flee. If Link freed him from obligations, he'd gratefully abandon his post. If not, he remained until the end, duty bound unto death. Café and Anju's quest represented the game's most elaborate emotional story. Café, transformed into a child by the Skull Kid with his wedding mask stolen, had disappeared days before their wedding. His fiancée Anju waited at the inn. The quest spanned 3 full days, requiring precise timing to track Café's movements, recover his mask, and arrange for the couple to meet in the inn's back room during final hours. If completed successfully, they'd reunite, exchange wedding masks, and face the end together. Heartbreaking and beautiful testimony to connection facing annihilation. The moon itself was constant psychological presence, impossible to ignore. The face carved into its surface was one of Nintendo's most disturbing images, not just threatening, but personally malevolent. As hours progressed, the moon grew larger, closer, more detailed. By final hours, it filled the entire upward view, so close that impact seemed unavoidable. If players allowed the cycle to complete, the game didn't spare them the conclusion. The screen shook, music crescendoed. The moon collided with Clocktown in a light blast consuming everything. "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" appeared before the game over screen. It was genuinely disturbing, a Nintendo game showing the player's failure to save everyone. The transformation masks added layers to identity and loss exploration. The Goron mask came from Darmani, a hero who died attempting to end Snowhead Mountain's eternal winter. Link encountered his ghost, unable to move on. Playing the song of healing eased the spirit's suffering, allowing rest while his essence became a mask, granting Link the ability to transform into a Goron. The Zora mask's origin was even more heartbreaking. Mikau, lead guitarist and warrior, lay dying on a beach, having failed to rescue stolen Zora eggs. Link found him in final moments, played the song of healing, and eased his passing. What made transformations unsettling was the cutscene showing Link's body contorting, twisting, reshaping in clearly painful ways. Link's scream of agony was audible. Body horror played for emotional impact, reminding these weren't power-ups, but preserved forms of the dead. The four temples, serving as main dungeons, ended with battles against bosses possessed by Majora's Mask pieces. Defeating these freed the four giants, ancient beings who'd once protected Termina. Unlike Ocarina's sages helping from the sacred realm, the four giants would physically intervene during final confrontation. After all four giants were freed, Link played the Oath to Order, summoning them to Clock Town as the moon made its final descent. The giants appeared at cardinal points, reaching up with massive hands to catch and hold the moon. The Skull Kid, confronting giants he'd once called friends, broke down. The mask, realizing its host was no longer useful, abandoned the Skull Kid and retreated into the suspended moon. Inside the moon was a serene field, where children played beneath a tree, wearing boss masks. The surreal contrast between peaceful interior and apocalyptic exterior created cognitive dissonance, serving the game's dreamlike atmosphere. At center, beneath the tree, a child wearing Majora's Mask asked if Link wanted to play. The questions posed about friendship, good and bad, masks and identity, carried philosophical weight, elevating this beyond simple boss battle. The battle progressed through three forms. Majora's Mask detached and attacked with tentacles. When defeated, it transformed into Majora's incarnation, a childlike figure running and dancing while flinging projectiles. Finally came Majora's Wrath, towering and bristling with tentacles. Throughout, Link could use the fierce deity's mask, obtained by giving all other collected masks to the children inside the moon. Victory broke the curse. The moon dissolved. The Skull Kid, freed from possession, remembered his friendship with the giants. Link returned to Clock Town to witness the Carnival of Time, the celebration occurring because the world hadn't ended. The ending montage showed various characters Link had helped. Each life saved represented dozens of resets, of dying repeatedly via moon impact, returning to day one and trying again. Majora's Mask changed everything because it proved the franchise could be radically experimental while remaining undeniably Zelda. The time loop, compact world, emphasis on side quests over dungeons, dark tone, mortality exploration, none were traditional Zelda elements, yet the game worked. It demonstrated the series' identity wasn't tied to specific mechanics, but something deeper. Thoughtful design, respect for player intelligence, willingness to use the interactive medium to explore ideas other entertainment forms couldn't access similarly. The game's cult status grew as players returned and discovered depths missed initially. The environmental storytelling, NPC schedules revealing character through action, philosophical questions embedded in scenarios. These rewarded careful attention and multiple playthroughs. Majora's Mask became the Zelda game for players wanting more than heroic adventure, who appreciated games could be unsettling and sad, while remaining beautiful and meaningful. The Electronic Entertainment Expo of 2001 should have been a triumph for Nintendo and The Legend of Zelda. The GameCube, Nintendo's next-generation console, was set to launch later that year, and fans eagerly anticipated their first glimpse of what Link's adventures would look like on more powerful hardware. The previous E3 had showcased a technical demo featuring Link and Ganondorf locked in combat, rendered with realistic textures and dramatic lighting that suggested a mature, sophisticated evolution of Ocarina of Time's visual style. The demo had been received with rapturous excitement. Players imagined dungeons rendered with photorealistic detail, a Hyrule brought to life with unprecedented fidelity, a Zelda game that would showcase what the GameCube's superior processing power could achieve. Then Nintendo revealed the actual game, and the backlash was immediate and vitriolic. The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, as the new game was titled, bore no resemblance to the realistic demo from the previous year. Instead of detailed textures and mature aesthetics, the game featured cel-shaded graphics that made everything look like a cartoon. Link had enormous eyes, an oversized head, and exaggerated expressions. The world was rendered in bold, flat colors with thick, black outlines. Enemies looked comical rather than threatening. The ocean, which comprised much of the game world, appeared simplified and stylized. To fans expecting a dark, mature Zelda that would compete with realistic games on other platforms, Wind Waker looked like a children's cartoon, a betrayal of the series' potential, and a waste of the GameCube's capabilities. The online communities erupted with criticism. Petitions circulated demanding Nintendo change the art style before release. Mock-up images showed what the game should look like with realistic graphics applied to the cel-shaded models. Articles questioned whether Nintendo understood their audience, whether the company was too conservative and family-focused to create games that appealed to the maturing players who had grown up with Ocarina of Time. The term Zelda became a derogatory nickname used to dismiss the game before anyone had actually played it. The controversy overshadowed nearly everything else about the game's reveal, turning what should have been a celebration of innovation into a referendum on Nintendo's creative direction. Nintendo, to their credit, didn't waver. Eiji Aonuma, who had moved from his role on Majora's Mask to director on Wind Waker, defended the artistic choice in interviews. The CL-shaded style, he explained, allowed for more expressive character animation and would age better than the realistic graphics other developers were pursuing. The team wanted to create a timeless visual style rather than chasing photorealism that would look dated as technology advanced. Shigeru Miyamoto supported the decision, arguing that gameplay and artistic vision mattered more than raw graphical fidelity. They would proceed with their vision regardless of fan outcry. The Legend of Zelda. The Wind Waker released in December of 2002 in Japan, March of 2003 in North America, and May of 2003 in Europe. When players finally experienced the game firsthand rather than judging it from screenshots and trailers, many found their preconceptions challenged. The CL-shaded graphics, divorced from expectations and judged on their own merits, were stunning. Link's enormous eyes weren't just cute, they were expressive in ways that polygonal characters had never achieved. When he spotted an enemy, his eyes would track the target. When he solved a puzzle, his face lit up with genuine joy. When danger threatened, fear registered clearly in his expressions. The animation quality, freed from the constraints of realistic movement, allowed for exaggerated, fluid motion that gave characters personality and life. The art style's greatest vindication came with time itself. Wind Waker released in the same era as many games pursuing photorealistic graphics on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube. Those games, impressive in their moment, aged rapidly as technology advanced and their attempts at realism became dated. Wind Waker, by contrast, looks virtually timeless. The bold colors, clean lines, and stylized animation have a quality that transcends technological limitations. 2 decades later, the game remains visually appealing in ways that many of its contemporaries don't. The cell shading that seemed like a betrayal in 2001 proved to be a gift that kept the game fresh and beautiful long after release. But Wind Waker's boldest innovation wasn't its visual style. It was the decision to flood Hyrule itself. The game's opening explained through stained glass and narration that this was a timeline where, after Ocarina of Time's Hero of Time disappeared, Ganondorf eventually broke free from his seal and returned to threaten the kingdom. With no hero to stop him, the gods made a desperate choice. They flooded the entire land, sealing Ganondorf beneath the waves and preserving what remained of civilization on mountaintops that became islands in a vast ocean. Centuries passed. The flooded world became known as the Great Sea. The Old Kingdom existed only in legend, stories told by the elderly to children who had never seen the drowned world beneath the waves. The Great Sea served as Wind Waker's overworld, replacing the traditional Hyrule field with an ocean dotted with 49 islands arranged in a 7x7 grid. Link, now living on Outset Island with his grandmother and younger sister Eril, began his adventure when Eril was kidnapped by a giant bird working for the Helmarok King. The journey to rescue her transformed into a grander quest to awaken sages and restore the Master Sword, ultimately leading to confrontation with Ganondorf himself. But unlike previous Zelda games where the overworld served primarily as connective tissue between dungeons and towns, the Great Sea was the adventure, a space designed for exploration and discovery, where the journey mattered as much as any destination. Sailing the Great Sea required the King of Red Lions, a talking boat who served as Link's companion and transportation. The boat moved via sail power, with wind direction controlled by conducting the Wind Waker baton and playing the wind's requiem. The sailing itself became meditative, a process that couldn't be rushed or skipped in the original release. As Link stood at the bow, wind filling the sail, the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction, the experience created a sense of adventure and scale different from any previous Zelda. The horizon was real, not a suggestion. Islands appeared as small shapes in the distance, growing larger and more detailed as Link approached. Seagulls circled overhead. Sea creatures occasionally broke the surface. Storms rolled in, changing the ocean's mood from serene to dangerous. Each island had its own identity and purpose. Some housed dungeon entrances or towns. Others contained small puzzles or mini-games. A few were almost entirely empty, just small rocky outcroppings with perhaps a treasure chest or a secret cave. But even the empty islands served the greater design, creating a world that felt vast and real, rather than efficiently packed with content. The emptiness was part of the experience, the sense that this ocean existed beyond its function as a game space, that exploring it meant accepting periods of travel and contemplation between moments of action and discovery. The Great Sea's design philosophy represented a significant risk. Many players found the sailing tedious, especially when backtracking became necessary. The inability to skip or speed through travel time without finding special items meant that returning to previously visited islands could feel like repetition. Critics pointed to this as a flaw, evidence that the game prioritized atmosphere over player convenience, but others recognized the sailing as essential to Wind Waker's identity, the stretches of quiet travel allowing players to absorb the experience, to feel the journey's weight, to understand Link's adventure not as a series of disjointed challenges, but as an epic voyage across a transformed world. The moment that recontextualized everything, that elevated Wind Waker from excellent adventure to something approaching profound, occurred roughly 2/3 through the game. After collecting the Master Sword and restoring some of its power, after meeting Tetra and discovering her true identity as Princess Zelda, Link was directed to seek out the ancient sages who could fully restore the blade's strength. To reach them, he had to descend through the Tower of the Gods, following a path that led deeper and deeper until he passed beneath the ocean floor itself and entered what should have been solid earth, but was instead open air. Hyrule Castle stood before him, perfectly preserved but utterly still. The castle grounds, the buildings, the very air, everything was frozen in a moment from centuries past, protected by divine power but lifeless, a monument to a kingdom that no longer existed. The world was rendered in monochrome, drained of color except for Link himself and the magical barrier maintaining the preservation. As Link walked through the castle courtyard, his footsteps echoed in absolute silence. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. This was Hyrule's tomb, the kingdom sacrificed to stop Ganondorf's rampage when the hero of time failed to appear. The psychological impact of this moment on players who had spent dozens of hours in Ocarina of Time's version of Hyrule Castle cannot be overstated. The layout was familiar, recognizable from the child and adult timelines of the previous game. The same courtyards existed, the same basics, structure, enough similarity to trigger memory and recognition. But where Ocarina's castle had been alive with guards and activity, where even its adult timeline destruction had maintained a sense of conflict and struggle, this submerged version was simply empty. The absence was deafening. Every familiar location reminded players of what had been lost, of the vibrant kingdom reduced to a preserved corpse beneath the sea. The King of Red Lions, who had accompanied Link throughout his journey, was revealed here to be the King of Hyrule himself, Daphne's Nohansen Hyrule, magically sustained and transformed to guide the next hero when one finally appeared. His presence in the drowned castle added weight to every word he'd spoken throughout the adventure. This wasn't just a helpful magical artifact or mysterious companion. This was the last king of the Old Kingdom, the ruler who had watched his land flood, who had endured centuries waiting for a chance to set things right. His perspective shifted the entire narrative, from a straightforward hero's journey to a meditation on legacy, on what it meant to cling to the past versus embracing the future. Link progressed deeper into the castle, eventually reaching the chamber where the Master Sword rested in its pedestal. The same pedestal from Ocarina of Time, the same location where Link had drawn the blade and been sealed for 7 years. But here, the sword was simply stuck, waiting, surrounded by preserved silence. As Link approached and the moment of claiming the blade arrived, the music shifted. The familiar strains of Hyrule Castle's theme, From a Link to the Past, began to play. that iconic melody that had represented the heart of the kingdom since the Super Nintendo era. Hearing it here, in this drowned monument, transformed the nostalgia into something bittersweet and profound. The music continued as Link explored the preserved castle, searching for clues to the sage's locations. Each room was a museum exhibit of the old world, furniture and tapestries maintained by the preservation spell, but serving no function, witnessing no life. The contrast between the vibrant, cell-shaded Link, full of motion and expression and color, and the frozen, monochrome castle emphasized the disconnect between past and present, between what had been and what remained. Wind Waker's art style, the very thing critics had dismissed as childish, proved essential to conveying this specific emotion. The juxtaposition wouldn't have worked with realistic graphics. The stylized present needed to contrast with the frozen past to create the intended effect. The reveal of Hyrule's fate served as Wind Waker's thesis statement, the moment when the game's themes crystallized into focus. This wasn't a story about restoring the old kingdom. Hyrule was gone, drowned deliberately by the gods, sealed away because it had become a symbol of Ganondorf's ambition and the destruction that ambition wrought. The Great Sea wasn't a temporary obstacle to be overcome so the land could be restored. It was the new world, the future that had been built on the grave of the past. Link's quest wasn't to bring back what was lost, but to ensure that the new world, the islands, the ocean, the people who lived there, could survive and thrive without being dragged down by the weight of history. This theme reached its culmination in Ganondorf's portrayal, which represented the most nuanced and tragic version of the character the series had yet presented. Throughout Wind Waker, hints suggested that this Ganondorf was different from previous incarnations. He moved with tired grace rather than manic energy. His dialogue carried weight and weariness. When Link finally confronted him in his tower at the ocean's surface, when the final battle approached, Ganondorf did something unprecedented for the series' primary antagonist. He explained himself. Standing on his tower's balcony, looking out over the great sea with Link and Zelda before him, Ganondorf spoke about the desert. He described the Gerudo homeland, the wasteland where his people struggled to survive while Hyrule's green lands flourished nearby. He spoke of how the wind that brought life to Hyrule carried only death to the desert, hot and dry and merciless. His conquest hadn't been mindless evil, but desperate ambition, a desire to claim for his people the prosperous lands they'd been denied by geography and fate. That ambition had consumed him, transformed him into the Demon King, cost him everything he'd sought to gain. Now, centuries later, he was simply tired, a relic from a drowned age, still pursuing a dream that no longer mattered. The tragedy of Ganondorf's characterization wasn't that it excused his actions, but that it humanized them. He was a man who had made terrible choices in pursuit of understandable goals, who had been corrupted by power, but retained enough self-awareness to recognize what he'd become. His monologue about the desert wind was delivered with genuine emotion, a moment of vulnerability that made him sympathetic even as he prepared to fight to the death. The cell-shaded art style, paradoxically, made this emotional honesty work better than realism might have. Ganondorf's expressions, his body language, the way his face moved as he spoke, all of it conveyed genuine feeling in ways that polygonal models couldn't quite achieve. The King of Hyrule's intervention at the critical moment underscored the game's themes about past and future. As Ganondorf reached to claim the complete Triforce and make his wish to restore the old kingdom under his rule, as it seemed the villain might actually succeed, the king appeared and touched the Triforce first. His wish, delivered with quiet finality, was not to restore Hyrule, but to destroy it completely, to wash away the old kingdom and give Link and Zelda, who he called the future, the hope, a chance to build something new, without the weight of the past crushing them. Ganondorf's reaction was not rage, but laughter, bitter and broken, as he realized that even in this final moment, Hyrule's legacy had defeated him, had chosen oblivion over his rule. The final battle that followed took place as water began to pour into the preserved castle, the divine protection breaking as the king's wish took effect. Link and Ganondorf fought sword to sword, while Zelda provided support with light arrows, the same basic structure as Ocarina of Time's climax, but inverted, stripped of the grand architecture and cinematic scale to become something more personal and desperate. The water rose as they fought. The monochrome castle began to collapse. Everything was ending, not just for Ganondorf, but for the last remnants of the old kingdom. When Ganondorf finally fell, when Link drove the Master Sword through his skull in a moment of shocking violence that earned Wind Waker its teen rating, the villain didn't roar or curse or threaten return. He simply turned to stone, frozen with the blade still embedded in his forehead, petrified mid-defeat as the ocean rushed in around them. It was brutal and final, a visceral end to the series' primary antagonist that felt earned after the complexity the game had given his character. The CL-shaded art style made the violence somehow more impactful rather than less. The contrast between the game's overall aesthetic and the unflinching brutality of the final blow, creating cognitive dissonance that forced players to confront what they were seeing. The King of Hyrule remained behind, as Link and Zelda, who insisted on being called Tetra again, rejecting the role of princess in favor of her pirate identity, escaped the drowning castle. His final words to them were not about duty or destiny, but about life, about building a future unburdened by the past, about having hope even as the world they knew ended. He chose to die with his kingdom, to ensure that the old world truly ended, so the new one could begin. As Link and Tetra surfaced, breaking through the ocean into sunlight, the drowned kingdom remained below, finally allowed to rest. The ending was bittersweet in ways few Zelda games dared to be. Victory had come at the cost of complete destruction. The Master Sword remained below, piercing Ganondorf's stone form, lost forever to the depths. The old kingdom was gone, erased by the king's wish. But Link and Tetra survived, emerging from the ocean onto the King of Red Lions' deck, the boat powered by the king's spirit now truly lifeless, just wood and sail. They were alone on the water, but they were alive, free to seek new lands beyond the great sea's boundaries, to build a future that honored the past without being enslaved to it. The final shot showed their ship sailing toward the horizon, toward unknown lands beyond the map, as Tetra expressed her desire to find new continents and establish a kingdom that would be theirs, not an attempt to reclaim what was lost. The game ended, not with restoration, but with the promise of creation, with Link and Tetra as pioneers rather than restorers. The symbolic weight was clear. The series itself was moving forward, accepting that the past, Even beloved classics like Ocarina of Time and the original Hyrule Kingdom might need to be left behind for new stories and new visions to emerge. Wind Waker's critical reception was complex, much like Majora's Mask before it. Review scores were generally high, but player reception remained divided. Those who embraced the art style and sailing found a masterpiece of atmosphere and thematic depth. Those who couldn't move past their initial disappointment focused on pacing issues, the tedium of backtracking across the ocean, and dungeons that felt fewer and shorter than previous entries. The game sold reasonably well, but underperformed compared to Ocarina of Time, whether due to the art style controversy, the GameCube's smaller install base compared to the Nintendo 64, or simply market saturation in an era when numerous quality adventure games competed for attention. The re-evaluation began gradually, but accelerated over time. As the generation progressed and players returned to Wind Waker with fresh perspectives, the qualities that had been overshadowed by controversy became increasingly apparent. The art style's timelessness became undeniable as realistic games from the same era aged poorly. The sailing, while still polarizing, was recognized by some as essential to the game's identity and atmosphere, rather than simple padding. The story's emotional sophistication, the humanization of Ganondorf, the themes of letting go and moving forward, these elements resonated more deeply on repeat playthroughs when players weren't distracted by unmet expectations about how the game should look. The release of The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker HD for the Wii U in 2013 provided vindication and closure to the decade-long controversy. The remaster maintained the cel-shaded art style while increasing resolution and adding subtle improvements to animation and lighting. More significantly, it addressed the original's most common criticism by streamlining sailing with the swift sail, which moved faster and didn't require constant wind direction changes, and by reducing the Triforce hunt's tedium through design adjustments. The remaster's critical and commercial reception was overwhelmingly positive, with many reviewers acknowledging that time had proven Wind Waker's artistic vision correct. The game they'd dismissed in 2001 now looked better than the realistic games they'd championed. Wind Waker's influence on the industry manifested in ways both obvious and subtle. The willingness to pursue stylized art over photorealism influenced countless developers who realized that timeless aesthetics could be achieved through bold artistic choices rather than raw graphical power. Games like Okami, Jet Set Radio Future, and later cel-shaded titles owed debts to Wind Waker's demonstration that cartoonish didn't mean childish, that style could serve substance rather than undermining it. The Great Sea's emphasis on exploration and environmental storytelling influenced open-world design philosophy, the understanding that empty space could serve atmosphere and pacing rather than simply representing wasted potential. Within the Zelda series, Wind Waker established that the franchise could and should take risks, that each major entry could pursue radically different aesthetics and structures while maintaining essential Zelda identity. Twilight Princess would swing in the opposite direction toward darker, more realistic visuals, while Skyward Sword would pursue impressionistic painted aesthetics. Breath of the Wild's massive open world and physics-based interaction system represented evolution of Wind Waker's emphasis on exploration and player freedom. The lesson was clear. Zelda would never stagnate, would never simply repeat what had worked before. Each entry would challenge expectations, would pursue its own vision even at the risk of initial rejection. The moment when Link descended beneath the ocean and found the drowned kingdom became one of the series' most memorable for how it used the medium's unique strengths. Only in a game where players had spent hours exploring the world above, where they'd built their own relationship with the great sea and its islands, could the reveal of what lay beneath carry such weight. A film could show the sunken castle, but players had sailed over it unknowingly for hours, had built assumptions about the world that the reveal shattered. The interactivity made the discovery personal rather than simply cinematic. Similarly, the final blow against Ganondorf resonated because players delivered it themselves, made the choice to drive the blade through the villain's skull, even after the game had spent hours humanizing him, showing his weariness and failed dreams. That agency transformed the moment from simple violence into something more complex, forcing players to confront their role as executioners rather than simply heroes defeating evil. The cel-shaded art style, far from diminishing the impact, actually enhanced it through contrast, the cheerful aesthetic colliding with brutal action to create dissonance that served the narrative's maturity. Wind Waker proved that Nintendo's courage to pursue its vision, despite overwhelming initial criticism, could result in enduring masterpieces that outlived the controversy surrounding their birth. The game they created was better for ignoring fan demands to change course, for trusting that their artistic instincts would ultimately be vindicated. The petitions and online mockery from 2001 now seem embarrassingly short-sighted, evidence of how knee-jerk reactions to artistic choices can miss the deeper qualities that make work endure. Those enormous eyes critics dismissed now convey more emotion than countless realistic protagonists have managed. That ocean they called empty now feels more alive and meaningful than many densely packed open worlds. The cartoon aesthetic they rejected now looks more beautiful than the realistic graphics they demanded. As we continue our journey through the defining moments of the Zelda series, Wind Waker stands as testament to the power of artistic conviction, to the importance of allowing creative teams the freedom to pursue their vision even when that vision challenges expectations. The game's legacy isn't just in its technical achievements or design innovations, but in its demonstration that the path forward sometimes requires leaving beloved elements behind, that growth demands risk, that the most meaningful victories often come only after passing through the crucible of criticism and doubt. Link and Tetra sailing toward unknown horizons in the final shot wasn't just their story. It was Nintendo's message about the series itself, a promise that Zelda would always seek new waters rather than sailing endlessly in circles around the familiar. The reveal of Twilight Princess at E3 2004 represented Nintendo's direct response to Wind Waker controversy. After years of criticism about cel-shaded graphics, the trailer showed Link as players claimed they'd wanted: mature, realistic, rendered with detailed textures and dramatic lighting. He rode through fields on Epona, fought enemies with visceral combat, faced massive bosses in dark dungeons. The crowd's reaction was rapturous. This, fans declared, was the Zelda they'd been waiting for. The Legend of Zelda. Twilight Princess released in November 2006, launching simultaneously on GameCube and Nintendo's new console, the Wii. Directed by Eiji Aonuma, with contributions from the team that created Wind Waker and Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess represented the series' longest development cycle to that point, with over 3 years resulting in the largest and most content-dense Zelda game yet created. The opening established pastoral piece that would make Coming Darkness more impactful. Link lived in Orden Village, a small settlement on Hyrule's southern edge. He worked as a ranch hand, herding goats and helping villagers. The game took time establishing this world and Link's place in it. He mentored village children who looked up to him. He shared unspoken feelings with Ilia, the mayor's daughter. He prepared to deliver a sword to Hyrule Castle, a routine errand that should have been simple. Then, monsters came. Link watched helplessly as shadow beasts attacked, kidnapping children including Colin, a boy who idolized him. When Link pursued into the forest, he encountered a wall of twilight separating Light's realm from something else. As he passed through, Link's body convulsed and transformed. His limbs shortened, hands became paws, body covered in fur. The transformation was shown in silhouette, Link's scream of pain audible as his form shifted. When complete, he stood as a wolf, confused and terrified, immediately seized by shadow beasts and dragged into Twilight's depths. The body horror set the tone for Twilight Princess's approach to darkness. This wasn't cartoonish. Realistic graphics made Link's pain and fear palpable. Unlike previous games where power-ups came with triumphant fanfare, this change was violation. The wolf form wasn't initially empowering, but limiting and frightening. The message was clear. This would be a Zelda game willing to put its hero through genuine trauma. Link awakened chained in a Hyrule Castle cell, still in wolf form, unable to speak beyond growls. The castle existed in the Twilight Realm, transformed from majestic structure to dark, corrupted shadow. Here Link met Midna, an imp-like creature who appeared to mock his predicament. She perched on his back with casual ownership, tone sarcastic, motivations unclear. Midna explained the world had been covered in twilight, that Hyrule was falling to shadow, and she could help him escape. But only if he helped her in return. The dynamic between Link and Midna was contentious from the start. She clearly had her own agenda, seeing Link primarily as a tool. Her dialogue dripped with sarcasm and barely concealed contempt. When she helped him escape, it was to serve her purposes. Yet her design and voice acting made her immediately memorable, despite apparent hostility. The Twilight Realm was one of the game's most striking atmospheric achievements. Areas covered in twilight were rendered in monochrome, drained except for orange and teal tones, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Shadow beasts roamed freely. Most unsettling were Twily souls, spectral forms of Hyrule's citizens frozen in poses of fear, trapped in the moment twilight consumed them. Link could see these spirits as a wolf, but couldn't interact, couldn't save them, could only witness their suffering. Link's quest structure became clear. The twilight had spread from multiple points, each anchored by a shadow insect. To restore light to a region, Link had to track down and destroy all shadow insects, then confront the beast anchoring twilight at that location. Only by defeating twilight beasts and collecting vessels of light could Light's realm be restored piece by piece. As Link progressed and eventually confronted Diababa in the forest temple, Midna's behavior began shifting subtly. Her mocking tone remained, but hints of genuine concern occasionally broke through. When Link was in danger, her warnings carried urgency, belying casual cruelty. When he succeeded restoring light, Her satisfaction seemed genuine. The restoration of Link's human form came through Midna's intervention, though motivated by practicality. A wolf could go where humans couldn't, but many tasks required human hands and weapon-wielding ability. Midna gave Link the ability to transform between forms at will, though the power was hers to grant. Another reminder of their unequal relationship. In human form, Midna manifested as a shadow attached to Link, visible only to him. The evolution of Midna's character played out across dozens of hours, revealed through small moments. She began offering genuinely helpful advice. Her sarcasm took on playful quality. She commented on people Link met and places visited with actual curiosity. The bond deepened through natural camaraderie, developing between people facing danger together, gradually learning to trust despite initial antagonism. The first major test came with King Bulblin and the children's rescue. After clearing Twilight from Faron Woods and Eldin Province, Link learned kidnapped Orden children had been taken to Kakariko Village. When he arrived, he found it under siege by King Bulblin. The children were captive, and Colin had been seized as hostage. The massive warrior fled across Hyrule Field with Colin, forcing Link to pursue on Epona in one of the game's most cinematic sequences. The chase across Hyrule Field showcased why Twilight Princess had earned comparisons to epic fantasy films. Link and Epona galloped at full speed, closing distance as King Bulblin's boar thundered ahead. Music swelled with heroic urgency. As they entered the Bridge of Eldin, the confrontation became a jousting match, both riders charging toward each other. The collision occurred in dramatic slow motion. If Link's aim was true, King Bulblin knocked from his mount. What made the sequence memorable beyond spectacle was the aftermath. As Link held Colin safe, the sun broke through clouds. Link stood on Epona in a freeze-frame moment of heroism, music reaching its triumphant crescendo. It was unabashedly cinematic, deliberately evoking classic Western films and samurai epics. Colin's recognition added emotional weight. The boy who'd been so timid found courage seeing what Link would risk to save him. In a brief but affecting scene, Colin told Link he wanted to be like him, to be brave and help others. It grounded Link's heroism in personal connection rather than abstract duty. As the adventure progressed through Twilight Princess's massive world, encompassing 8 dungeons plus Hyrule Castle, countless side quests, and an overworld larger than any previous Zelda, Midna's true nature gradually revealed itself. She was not merely an imp, but the Twilight Princess herself, rightful ruler of the Twily people. Zant, her servant, had usurped her throne with dark power's help, transformed her into her current form, and launched the invasion. Everything she'd done had been in service of reclaiming her kingdom and stopping Zant's ambition. The moment cementing Midna as not just Twilight Princess's best companion, but arguably the series' most beloved character came in the journey to save her life. After Link collected the third fused shadow, Zant himself appeared and attacked. The confrontation was brief and devastating. Zant possessed power far beyond what Link could counter. He reclaimed the fused shadows, broke Midna's ability to maintain herself in the light world, and left her dying. Link's only hope was reaching Zelda in Hyrule Castle, the princess who might possess power to save Midna. The journey that followed became known as Midna's Lament, and it remains one of gaming's most emotionally powerful sequences. Link transformed into a wolf with the dying Midna on his back. He began the desperate run from Lanayru Spring to Hyrule Castle Town, the distance significant, the need urgent. As Link ran, one of the most hauntingly beautiful pieces in the series' musical history began to play. The composition was simple, built around piano and strings, but conveyed desperate sorrow and determination. The melody was Zelda's lullaby, transformed into something mournful and pleading. The music wasn't triumphant, but broken and fragile, matching Midna's weakened state and Link's frantic efforts. What elevated the sequence from good to transcendent was how the game refused to skip or abbreviate the journey. Players had to actually run the distance, had to feel every step's weight, had to experience desperation rather than simply being told about it. The music continued throughout, never breaking, maintaining emotional intensity from start to finish. Enemies sometimes appeared, and their interruption felt like cruelty, obstacles between Link and the help Midna desperately needed. Midna barely spoke during the journey, occasionally whispering weakly. Her usual confidence and sarcasm were gone, replaced by vulnerability, making her sudden fragility heartbreaking. This was the character who'd mocked Link from their first meeting, who'd seemed invulnerable behind her snark wall. Seeing her reduced to this weakened state created emotional investment no exposition could have achieved. Upon reaching Hyrule Castle, Link found Princess Zelda held captive in her throne room. The princess had surrendered the kingdom to Zant to save her people from slaughter. When Link arrived with dying Midna, Zelda assessed the situation with calm understanding. She knew what was required and knew the cost. Zelda placed her hands on Midna, and brilliant light enveloped them both. The princess transferred her life force to Midna, sacrificing herself. As light faded, Midna's form stabilized, colors returning, strength restored. But Zelda herself faded, her body dissolving into light particles flowing into Midna, merging their spirits. The princess disappeared, her throne left empty, her sacrifice complete. The moment transformed both characters' arcs. Midna was no longer the detached manipulator. She was now someone who'd received grace she didn't deserve, who carried another's sacrifice weight, who understood the connection depth between herself and Link through Zelda's willingness to die for them both. From this point forward, Midna's character was fundamentally changed. Her dialogue carried new weight and sincerity. She expressed genuine concern for Link's well-being. She spoke of their quest in terms of we and us. The sarcasm remained but was softened, made affectionate rather than cutting. The relationship evolved from uneasy alliance to genuine partnership. The journey continued through memorable dungeons. The Arbiter's grounds provided horror-themed gameplay in an atmosphere-drenched setting. The Snow Peak ruins combined dungeon exploration with environmental storytelling, rivaling Majora's Mask's best moments. The Temple of Time used the goddess statue and massive gears to create puzzles around time manipulation. Each demonstrated why Twilight Princess had taken so long to develop. The revelation about the Mirror of Twilight provided crucial narrative context. The mirror existed in the Arbiter's grounds, the only gateway between Light World and Twilight Realm. Long ago, the goddesses had banished magic users to the Twilight Realm for attempting to seize the sacred realm's power. These banished people became the Twilai. Midna was their princess, descended from ancient exiles. The mirror was unbreakable, save by Twilight's true ruler. But the mirror had been shattered. This revealed Zant, despite his power, was not the true ruler. He'd been granted power by something else, enabling his coup and giving him the ability to spread twilight across Hyrule. The fragments were scattered, requiring Link to embark on a quest within the quest to reassemble the mirror so they could reach the Twilight Realm and confront Zant in his own domain. Zant's throne room confrontation was unlike any boss battle in series history. The usurper king awaited, and the fight progressed through multiple phases, each in locations from throughout the game showcasing different attack patterns. He fought Link in the Forest Temple, then Goron Mines, then Lakebed Temple, teleporting between arenas as he cycled through increasingly unhinged combat styles. What made the encounter memorable was Zant's behavior. He moved with jerky, unnatural motions, more puppet than warrior. He screamed and gestured wildly, threw tantrum-like fits when attacks failed. The battle was unsettling rather than epic. The music matched this energy, discordant and chaotic. The truth emerged after defeat. Zant had been nothing more than a pawn, a servant passed over for succession in favor of Midna. His bitterness made him vulnerable when dark power reached out offering everything he desired. That power was Ganondorf, the ancient demon king whose spirit persisted, seeking any avenue back to the living world. Ganondorf had used Zant as puppet, granting power in exchange for serving as vessel for the demon king's resurrection. The final confrontations took place across multiple locations and forms. First came the horseback battle across Hyrule Field, Link and Zelda, restored through Midna's sacrifice, working together. Zelda's light arrows stunned Ganondorf while Link struck from horseback. The sword duel in Hyrule Castle's throne room represented Ganondorf's true test of Link's worth. With Midna and Zelda watching, unable to intervene, Link faced the Demon King one-on-one. Just sword against sword, skill against skill. The duel was intimate after hours of grand spectacle. When Link struck the decisive blow, Ganondorf didn't explode or scream. He simply stood, the Master Sword piercing his chest, and looked upward. In his final moment, he acknowledged Link with something approaching respect. Then he died standing, never falling even in death, frozen in that final pose. It was fitting for a character who'd represented unyielding ambition, maintaining pride even as life left him. With Ganondorf defeated, only one task remained. The Twilight Mirror needed destruction to prevent future invasions between realms. But destroying it would sever the connection forever, meaning Midna could never return once she passed through. Everything Link and Midna had endured together led to this inevitable separation. The farewell scene in the Mirror Chamber remains one of gaming's most devastating endings. Midna, no longer in her imp form, but restored to her true appearance as Twilight Princess, tall and elegant, beautiful in ways making her imp form's cuteness seem like cruel irony, stood before the mirror with Link and Zelda. Her true form was revealed for only this brief moment before everything had to end. The dialogue was simple, but carried devastating weight. She told him she'd see him later, a casual phrase both knew was a lie. She called Zelda your princess, the possessive making. Clear that whatever had developed between Link and Midna, she recognized it could never be acted upon. The words were gift and sacrifice simultaneously. A single tear fell from her eye, crystallizing as it caught light, the only tear the restored Midna allowed herself. Link stood silent, his expression conveying grief and helplessness. The game's insistence on a silent protagonist served this moment perfectly. No words could improve upon emotion conveyed through animation and music alone. Midna turned to the mirror, and with her power as Twilight's true ruler, she shattered it. The fragments dissolved into light and shadow. Midna disappeared into the dissolving portal, gone from Link's life as suddenly as she'd entered it, taking with her any possibility of reunion or closure. Link and Zelda stood in the empty chamber, the mirror's remnants scattered as victory's weight settled over them. The kingdom was saved. The Twilight invasion ended. Peace was restored. But the cost was a companion Link had come to care for deeply. The game didn't offer comfort or easy resolution. Midna was gone. That was the price of saving both worlds. Twilight Princess's legacy manifested in multiple ways. Commercially, it was massive success, becoming the best-selling Zelda until Breath of the Wild surpassed it. The game moved nearly 9 million copies, vindicating the decision to pursue darker aesthetics. Critically, reception was overwhelmingly positive, praising dungeon design, combat system, story's emotional depth, and Midna as one of gaming's best companions. The relationship-driven narrative that Twilight Princess pioneered, with Midna as a companion undergoing genuine character development and forming meaningful bonds, influenced how future games approached supporting characters. The ending's emotional impact proved Zelda games could embrace bittersweet conclusions without alienating audiences. As we continue tracing defining moments, Twilight Princess stands as culmination of a particular era, perfecting the formula established by Ocarina and refined through subsequent entries. Its darkness wasn't just aesthetic, but thematic, willing to explore transformation, sacrifice, and irrevocable loss in ways earlier entries had only gestured toward. Following Twilight Princess's success and the Wii's revolutionary motion controls, Nintendo faced a unique challenge. The Wii's motion sensing capabilities had been used in Twilight Princess's Wii version, but only superficially. The technology promised genuine one-to-one sword combat. But could Zelda be rebuilt around motion controls while maintaining the series' identity? The Legend of Zelda. Skyward Sword, released in November 2011, represented Nintendo's answer. Developed over approximately 5 years under Eiji Aonuma's direction, the game utilized the Wii Motion Plus accessory to achieve precision motion control. The original Wii Remote couldn't deliver, but beyond motion control implementation, Skyward Sword undertook something more ambitious, serving as origin story for the entire Zelda timeline, explaining how the Master Sword came to exist, why Ganon eternally returns, and how the cycle of hero, princess, and demon king began. The game opened not in Hyrule, but above it. Skyloft was an island suspended in the sky along with smaller outcroppings, home to a peaceful society existing above clouds for generations beyond memory. People had no knowledge of what lay beneath the cloud barrier. They lived in harmony with massive birds called loftwings, each person bonded to a bird companion from childhood. The annual wing ceremony celebrated this bond. Link and Zelda's relationship was established from opening moments as something deeper than the series had previously shown. They were childhood friends who'd grown up together in the Knight Academy. Their connection was obvious and mutual, conveyed through body language and dialogue, suggesting feelings they hadn't quite articulated. When Zelda helped Link prepare for the wing ceremony, the warmth between them felt genuine, rather than simply declared. Link's victory in the ceremony led to a private moment with Zelda. High above Skyloft, Zelda took Link's hands as they stood on his loft wing. The moment was intimate, Zelda clearly working up courage to say something important. Then the tornado struck. A massive waterspout pulled Zelda from the loft wing with violent force. Link reached desperately, their fingertips touching but unable to maintain grip. Zelda plummeted through the cloud barrier, her screams fading as she disappeared into the white void below. The trauma of watching Zelda fall established stakes that were personal rather than cosmic. Link didn't need prophecy or duty commands to seek Zelda. His entire world had fallen through the clouds. The game showed Link's devastation, his inability to sleep, his desperate searching as if Zelda might reappear. The cloud barrier was impenetrable. Nothing that fell through could return. This was accepted truth. Then Fi appeared, manifesting from the blade Link had discovered calling to him. The sword had been sealed in a statue within Skyloft Temple. Fi emerged as a feminine figure of blue energy, her body composed of geometric shapes. Her voice was synthesized, musical but distinctly artificial. She explained she was the sword's spirit, created by the goddess to serve the chosen hero. That hero was Link, and his quest would require descending below clouds to the surface, world Skyloft's people had forgotten existed. Fi's character was designed as the antithesis of previous companions. Where they displayed personality and emotion, Fi was deliberately robotic and analytical. She calculated probabilities, provided statistical assessments, approached everything with logical detachment. Her observations often stated the obvious, creating a dynamic where helpfulness sometimes felt like interference. Yet beneath the mechanical exterior, hints of something deeper occasionally emerged. The descent to the surface was both literal and symbolic. The surface revealed itself as a wild, untamed realm of forests, deserts, volcanoes, and ruins. This was pre-Hyrule, the land before it had a name. Ancient technology suggested a past beyond memory. The aesthetic combined impressionistic art style. Environments looked almost painted, with machinery suggesting advanced ancient culture. The sealed grounds became Link's anchor point, a massive spiral pit at whose bottom something terrible was imprisoned. An old woman tended the seal, providing guidance. Link would return repeatedly, each visit revealing more about what slept below and why his journey mattered beyond rescuing Zelda. Girahim's introduction announced this Zelda would feature one of the series' most distinctive villains. The Demon Lord appeared with theatrical flair, immediately fixating on Zelda. His appearance was striking, white outfit contrasting with dark skin, tongue extending in disturbing gesture, movements simultaneously graceful and predatory. His mannerisms suggested someone performing for an audience. He spoke of Zelda with possessive obsession. What made Girahim memorable beyond flamboyance was genuine menace beneath theatricality. His boss battles were designed around motion controls, requiring players to observe his hand positions and strike from unblocked angles. He could catch Link's sword with his bare hand if attacks came, from protected directions, holding the blade and delivering a mocking tongue gesture before retaliating. The fights felt personal. Link's quest to restore the goddess sword to its full power as the Master Sword required venturing through 3 main surface regions: Faron Woods, Elden Volcano, and Lanayru Desert, each with multiple dungeons. Motion controls defined every interaction. The divisiveness of these controls would persist throughout the game's legacy, with some finding one-to-one sword combat revolutionary, while others found it exhausting and imprecise. The ancient cistern dungeon exemplified Skyward Sword's approach, creating spaces both mechanically interesting and thematically rich. The dungeon's upper levels were beautiful, built around a central water cistern, with Buddhist-inspired aesthetics. But beneath the serene upper floors existed horror contrasting sharply, a nightmare of undead hands reaching from pools of corruption. The boss battle against Kalaktos represented culmination of everything the ancient cistern had been building toward. The 6 armed mechanical demons sat in silent wait. When battle began, Kalaktos attacked with multiple arms. But the genius emerged when Link used the whip to tear off Kalaktos' arms, could then pick up those massive swords and use them against the boss. The satisfaction of dismembering the mechanical demon with its own oversized weapons created visceral power, justifying the motion control system's existence. As Link progressed through dungeons collecting sacred flames to evolve the goddess sword, the truth about Zelda's nature gradually revealed itself. Throughout his journey, Link would occasionally catch up to Zelda, protected by an attendant named Impa, who kept Link at distance. These encounters showed Zelda was not simply a victim, but an active participant in events larger than either understood. She was undergoing a ritual, visiting sacred springs, and awakening her true nature. The revelation came in the Temple of Hylia. She stood before him, recognition and relief evident, clearly wanting to embrace her childhood friend. Then memories came flooding back, the truth of her identity manifesting. Zelda was the goddess Hylia reborn, the divine being who'd protected the land in ancient times, who'd sacrificed divinity to become mortal so she could eventually wield the Triforce, which only mortals could touch, to seal away the great evil threatening existence itself. The explanation poured out in a rush, Zelda's voice breaking. She'd been a goddess in a past life, had orchestrated everything, including Link's suffering, because it was necessary to set events in motion that would eventually lead to the Demon King's defeat. She apologized profusely, guilt and sorrow overwhelming her. The words came between tears as divinity warred with humanity. When she said, "I'm still your Zelda," the line carried devastating weight because it was both true and insufficient. She was still the girl who'd flown, with him above Skyloft. But she was also something more, something divine and ancient that had set in motion the cycle of suffering they now existed within. The assertion of continuing identity was desperate plea and uncertain question simultaneously. Link couldn't answer because the game maintained his silence. Before any resolution could occur, Zelda explained the final necessity. She had to enter deep sleep to maintain the seal on the imprisoned. Only her continuous spiritual power could hold it, buying time for Link to complete his quest. She was asking him to watch her sleep for unknown length of time. The crystal formed around Zelda as she spoke final words, her hand reaching toward Link as the amber enclosure solidified. The last thing visible was her face, frozen in sorrow and apology. Eyes locked on Link as the barrier completed, and she fell into sleep that would last until his quest succeeded, or the demon broke free. The crystallized Zelda became Link's constant reminder of what he fought for and what he'd lost. Each return to the Temple of Hylia allowed him to see her frozen form, unchanged, sleeping while he endured every danger alone. The visual of her trapped in amber, hands still reaching, was one of Skyward Sword's most enduring images. The sealed ground's true nature revealed itself as Link's power grew. The imprisoned was revealed to be Demise in sealed form, the demon king who'd once nearly destroyed the world. When Link finally gathered the Triforce and used its power to destroy the imprisoned permanently, when he thought the battle won, Girahim, revealed to be Demise's sword spirit, a dark mirror to Fi, traveled back in time and restored his master. The final confrontation took place in the past. Demise cut an imposing figure but with strange nobility. He fought Link in traditional duel, Dark Master Sword against the Master Sword itself. When Demise fell, he accepted defeat with grace. But his final words carried prophecy and curse weight. His hatred would never die. It would reincarnate across time, following those who carried the goddess's blood and the hero's spirit. This was Ganon's cycle's origin. Demise's curse ensured the battle between darkness and light would rage across generations. With Demise destroyed and the Triforce's power securing the seal, Zelda awakened from crystal sleep. The reunion was quiet and tender. The game allowed this moment to breathe. The choice they made, to remain on the surface and help the land recover, to build civilization rather than returning to Skyloft's safety, represented hope for the future. This was how Hyrule began, founded by goddess-descended Zelda and chosen hero Link. Fi's farewell provided the game's other major emotional moment. The sword spirit who'd been so robotic finally revealed growth beneath her mechanical exterior. She admitted she'd learned about emotions through observing Link. She expressed something approaching affection as she explained that with the quest complete, she would return to sleep within the Master Sword. The sword that had been a tool became a companion in farewell. Link placed the Master Sword in its pedestal in the temple. As Fi's consciousness faded, players heard the last echoes of her musical voice. The silence that followed felt profound, the absence of her constant observations creating a void, making her loss palpable. Skyward Sword's position within the Zelda series was unique. As the chronological beginning, it provided answers to questions that had fascinated fans while creating new mysteries. The origin story succeeded in making the cycle feel inevitable and tragic, rather than simply repetitive. Each game's Link and Zelda weren't just similar characters, but literal reincarnations bound by ancient curse. The motion controls remained divisive throughout Skyward Sword's life and legacy. Defenders argued that when controls worked as intended, they created the most immersive combat the series had achieved. Critics countered that controls were exhausting, that technological limitations created frustrations. The release of Skyward Sword HD for Nintendo Switch in July 2021 provided an opportunity to re-evaluate the game, divorced from its most controversial element. The remaster offered traditional button controls as an alternative, allowing players who'd been unable to engage with the original a chance to experience the story without physical demands. Reception was warmer, with many acknowledging the game's qualities had been somewhat obscured by control scheme debates. Looking back, the game's influence became clearer. It represented culmination of a particular approach to Zelda design, the formula refined across Ocarina, Wind Waker, and Twilight. Princess pushed to its logical conclusion. The next major entry would need to do something radically different, would need to question assumptions about what made a Zelda game, rather than simply executing those assumptions more efficiently. The years following Skyward Sword's release in 2011 marked a period of introspection for the Zelda development team. The game had been critically successful and sold well, but its reception revealed fractures in the fan base that couldn't be ignored. The motion controls remained controversial. The hand-holding and constant tutorials had frustrated players who wanted to discover rather than be told. The segmented world structure, with its clearly defined regions accessed through a central hub, felt constrained compared to the open exploration that had defined the series' origins. Most tellingly, the formula that had been refined across multiple entries since Ocarina of Time was beginning to feel predictable. Players knew they would enter dungeons in a relatively fixed order, find a specific item in each dungeon, use that item to defeat the dungeon's boss, and repeat this structure until confronting the final enemy. The execution was superb, but the framework had become transparent. Meanwhile, the gaming landscape had evolved dramatically. Open-world games like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, released the same year as Skyward Sword, demonstrated that players craved freedom to explore vast spaces without predetermined paths. Games like Dark Souls showed that players would embrace challenge and minimal guidance if the world design was coherent enough to reward exploration. The success of sandbox titles like Minecraft proved that players wanted to interact with game worlds in creative, unscripted ways rather than following carefully designed solutions. The Zelda team, led by Eiji Aonuma, with significant input from series producer Hidemaru Fujibayashi and a large collaborative team, began asking fundamental questions. What makes a game a Zelda game? Which elements were essential and which were simply habits repeated because they'd worked before? What would happen if they stripped away everything except the core principles and rebuilt from there? The answer to these questions began taking shape in 2012 when Nintendo's EPD development team started serious pre-production on what would eventually become The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The development would span 5 years, longer than any previous Zelda game, with the team creating prototypes and testing ideas on a scale unprecedented for the series. They went back to Shigeru Miyamoto's original vision for the first Zelda game: the joy of discovery, the excitement of wondering what might be over the next hill, the satisfaction of solving problems through experimentation rather than following telegraphed solutions. They studied how players actually engaged with previous Zelda games, noting that the most beloved moments often occurred when players went off the intended path or discovered something the designers hadn't explicitly directed them toward. The game that emerged from this extended development was first revealed at the Electronic Entertainment Expo of 2014, though it wouldn't release until March of 2017. The Legend of Zelda. Breath of the Wild launched simultaneously on the dying Wii U and Nintendo's new Switch console, serving as both a farewell to one generation and the flagship title that defined the next. What players encountered was immediately and obviously different from any Zelda game before it. The opening moments established new rules, new priorities, new philosophies about what the series could be. Link awakened in the Shrine of Resurrection with no memory, no equipment, no context beyond a mysterious feminine voice calling to him. The chamber was small and technological, ancient machinery humming with power as Link opened his eyes and rose from the pool where he'd been submerged for an unknown length of time. A pedestal held a strange device called the Sheikah slate, clearly important though its purpose remained unclear. Link took it, doors opened, and he walked forward, through a short corridor toward a circle of light. The game gave no instructions, no tutorials, no hand-holding. Just the light ahead and the implicit promise that walking toward it would reveal answers. Emerging from the shrine of resurrection into the light of the Great Plateau created one of gaming's most perfect moments of reveal and realization. The camera pulled back as Link stepped into the open air, and the entirety of the game world spread before him in every direction. Mountains rose in the distance, forests blanketed valleys, ruins dotted the landscape. A massive castle stood at the center, dark energy swirling around its peaks. The draw distance was extraordinary, allowing players to see landmarks that were hours of travel away. The sky arched overhead in a realistic simulation of atmosphere and weather. This was Hyrule, but not as any previous game had shown it. This was a living, breathing wilderness that existed beyond its function as a game space, a world that invited exploration not through waypoints and markers, but through simple human curiosity about what might exist beyond the visible horizon. The Great Plateau served as Breath of the Wild's tutorial area, but it represented a radical reimagining of what tutorial meant. Rather than telling players what to do step by step, the game simply placed them in a relatively small region, though even this tutorial area was larger than entire overworlds from previous Zelda games, and allowed them to figure things out through experimentation. Want to know if you can climb that cliff? Try climbing it and see. Curious whether fire spreads through grass? Light it on fire and watch what happens. Wonder if that rock can be moved or broken. Hit it with various weapons and observe the results. The game taught through consequence and observation rather than explicit instruction, trusting players to be intelligent and curious rather than passive recipients of information. The old man was the Great Plateau's only visible inhabitant, a mysterious figure who seemed to be living rough in the wilderness, cooking over campfires and offering cryptic advice. He explained the basic situation. Link had been asleep for 100 years. The kingdom of Hyrule had fallen to a great calamity, and Princess Zelda was still somehow holding back the darkness despite a century having passed. To leave the Great Plateau, Link needed to visit 4 shrines, miniature dungeons containing puzzles and challenges, and collect the spirit orbs they offered. Complete this task, the old man promised, and he would give Link a paraglider that would allow descent from the plateau to the world beyond. The 4 shrines introduced core mechanics without explicitly tutorializing them. One shrine taught the importance of using the Sheikah slate's powers, specifically the magnesis ability that could move metal objects. Another demonstrated stasis, which could freeze objects in time and store kinetic energy. A third showed how bombs could be used both for combat and environmental puzzle solving. The fourth emphasized the importance of observing enemy patterns and using the environment strategically in combat. But none of these shrines held the player's hand through solutions. They presented problems and trusted players to experiment with the tools they'd been given until they discovered approaches that worked. Multiple solutions often existed, and the game happily accepted any method that achieved results, even if it wasn't the intended solution the designers had envisioned. The climbing mechanic represented perhaps the most fundamental break from previous Zelda design philosophy. In every prior game, Link could only traverse specifically designed paths, could only climb designated surfaces, could only access areas the designers had explicitly enabled. Breath of the Wild demolished these restrictions. Link could climb any surface, cliffs, walls, towers, buildings, even enemies if they were large enough, limited only by his stamina meter. The world was completely vertical in ways previous games had never allowed. This single design decision transformed exploration from following paths to genuinely going wherever curiosity led. See an interesting mountain in the distance? You can climb it, spot ruins on a high cliff, scale the wall and investigate. The freedom was intoxicating and fundamentally changed how players engaged with the world. The chemistry engine that governed environmental interactions elevated this freedom to emergent gameplay. Fire was real and behaved according to consistent rules. Light grass on fire during rain, and it wouldn't ignite because water prevented combustion. Light grass on fire in dry conditions, and the flames would spread realistically, creating updrafts that Link could use with his paraglider to gain altitude. Drop metal weapons during a thunderstorm, and lightning might strike them because metal conducts electricity. Freeze water to create ice platforms. Melt ice with fire to create water. Use fire arrows to light torches from a distance, or ice arrows to freeze enemies and water simultaneously. The systems interacted in ways that created possibilities the designers hadn't explicitly programmed, allowing players to solve problems through creative application of physical principles rather than using the specific item the dungeon was designed around. The discovery of these interactions was encouraged rather than explained. The game. Let players experiment and fail. Let them discover that wooden weapons would burn if exposed to flame, that metal shields would attract lightning, that certain materials reacted in specific ways to elemental forces. This design philosophy extended to combat, where players quickly learned that there was no single correct approach to any encounter. Stealth worked if you were patient. Direct assault worked if you were skilled. Using the environment, rolling boulders down hills, starting grass fires, manipulating enemy positions, worked if you were creative. The game respected player agency above designer intent, prioritizing the emergent stories created through player experimentation over scripted set pieces. The Guardian encounter that most players experienced early in their exploration provided Breath of the Wild's most effective lesson about the new world's dangers. Guardians were ancient machines that had once protected Hyrule, but had been corrupted by Calamity Ganon a century ago. They now wandered the wilderness as threats, their targeting lasers and devastating beams capable of killing Link in a single hit if his health and armor weren't sufficient. The first time a Guardian locked onto Link, the distinctive piano notes of warning began. The targeting laser appeared, tracking Link's movements as the Guardian charged its attack. Most players, early in their journey and poorly equipped, died to that first Guardian beam. The death was instructive rather than frustrating, because it taught a crucial lesson. Not every enemy could be defeated immediately. Some threats required retreat, required gaining power and skill before confrontation was wise. This philosophy represented another fundamental break from previous design. Earlier Zelda games carefully gated content, ensuring players couldn't access areas or enemies beyond their current capabilities. Breath of the Wild abandoned this protection. Players could wander into areas far beyond their ability to survive. could attempt challenges they weren't ready for, could fail spectacularly because they'd overestimated their preparedness. But this danger made success more meaningful. When players eventually became strong enough to face down guardians, to reflect their beams back at them with perfectly timed shield parries, the satisfaction came from genuine growth and mastery rather than simply reaching the point in the game where guardian fights were designed to occur. The old man's reveal as King Rome, the last king of Hyrule, who had died during the calamity a century ago and persisted as a spirit to guide the new hero, provided context and stakes for Link's journey. Through the king's story and the recovered memories scattered across Hyrule, players would gradually piece together what had happened, how the kingdom had fallen despite being prepared for Calamity Ganon's prophesied return, why Link had been placed in the Shrine of Resurrection for 100 years of healing sleep, and what role Zelda played in the century-long holding action that had prevented total annihilation. The narrative was delivered non-linearly, with players discovering story fragments in whatever order their exploration took them, creating a puzzle that assembled itself differently for every player based on their unique path through the world. Leaving the Great Plateau with the paraglider King Rome bestowed upon Link was a moment of pure liberation. The tutorial area's boundaries dissolved, and the entire world became accessible. The game suggested visiting Kakariko Village to meet Impa and learn more about Link's past, but nothing forced compliance with this suggestion. Players could head toward any visible landmark, could pursue any curiosity, could ignore the main quest entirely if they chose. The freedom was genuine, not the false freedom of many open-world games, where the critical path was obvious, despite claims of player choice. Skilled and determined players could go straight to Hyrule Castle and confront Calamity Ganon immediately if they were prepared to face the challenge. The game allowed it, even knowing most players would be slaughtered by attempting this path. Kakariko Village, when players eventually reached it, provided grounding and direction without restricting freedom. Impa, the ancient Sheikah elder who had served Zelda a century ago and now waited as one of the few who remembered the fallen kingdom, explained Link's connection to Zelda and the champions who had piloted the divine beasts, massive mechanical constructs designed to fight Calamity Ganon. The champions had died when Ganon corrupted the divine beasts and turned them against their pilots. Zelda had barely managed to seal Ganon in Hyrule Castle, beginning a century-long battle of wills that she couldn't maintain forever. Link's quest was clear: free the divine beasts from Ganon's control, ease Zelda's burden, and eventually enter Hyrule Castle to end Calamity Ganon permanently. But even this clear objective was presented as suggestion rather than mandate. Impa marked locations on Link's map where memories might be recovered, spots where significant events from a century ago had occurred. Finding these locations and experiencing the memories would reveal Link's past relationship with Zelda and the champions, would provide narrative context for the quest's emotional stakes. But completing this memory quest was entirely optional. Players could pursue it for story or ignore it for pure exploration. The game respected both approaches, offering a rich narrative for those who wanted it, while never forcing story on those who preferred to focus on gameplay and discovery. The memory system represented a sophisticated approach to non-linear storytelling. Each recovered memory was a fragment, A scene from 100 years ago showing interactions between Link, Zelda, and the champions as they prepared for Calamity Ganon's return. The memories revealed Zelda's character in unprecedented depth. She wasn't a distant princess or simple damsel, but a scientist and scholar, frustrated by her inability to access her sealing powers despite years of prayer and training, jealous of Link's easy mastery of his role as chosen hero, while she struggled with hers, desperate to prove her worth through research into ancient Sheikah technology, even as her father demanded she focus on awakening her divine power. The relationship between Link and Zelda evolved across these memories, from antagonistic to supportive. Early memories showed Zelda resenting Link's presence as her assigned knight, seeing him as a reminder of her own inadequacy, lashing out with petulant frustration that made her sympathetic despite her cruelty. Later memories revealed their growing friendship as Zelda recognized Link's silent support, as she began to see him not as a symbol of her failure, but as someone who understood pressure and expectation. The final memories showed genuine affection, with Zelda confiding in Link about her fears and frustrations, treating him as confidant rather than guard. The 13th memory, unlocked only after discovering the other 12, represented the emotional and narrative climax of the memory quest. The scene showed the moment of Calamity Ganon's return, the collapse of the plan. To use divine beasts and guardians against the ancient evil. Link fought desperately to protect Zelda as corrupted guardians turned their beams on the fleeing group. He was struck down, grievously wounded, collapsing as guardians advanced for the killing blow. Zelda, watching the person she'd come to care for most dying to protect her, felt something break inside. In that moment of absolute desperation, her power finally awakened. The sequence that followed was visually and emotionally spectacular. Zelda threw herself between Link and the Guardian, arm outstretched, tears streaming down her face. Golden light exploded from her raised hand, a wave of divine energy that paralyzed the Guardians mid-attack. The machines shut down, their corrupted programming overridden by Zelda's sacred power. For a brief moment, the camera lingered on Fi's familiar chime, the sword spirit briefly manifesting to acknowledge the princess's power, creating a connection across the timeline to Skyward Sword that gave longtime fans chills of recognition. The memory continued as Zelda, exhausted but determined, ordered the surviving Sheikah to take Link to the Shrine of Resurrection. She couldn't heal wounds so grievous, but the shrine's ancient technology might preserve him, might allow him to eventually return and complete the mission she knew she was about to undertake. Zelda took the Master Sword herself, carrying it to the Lost Woods, where it could wait for Link's return. Then she walked alone to Hyrule Castle to confront Calamity Ganon without the champions, without the divine beasts, without Link, with nothing but her newly awakened power and the determination to hold the darkness at bay until her knight could return. The memory ended with Zelda entering the sanctum, preparing for a battle that would last 100 years. This memory recontextualized the entire game. Every moment of exploration, every shrine completed, every incremental increase in Link's power. All of it occurred while Zelda continued her century-long struggle alone in the castle. The pressure to complete the quest wasn't abstract destiny, but personal obligation. Zelda had sacrificed everything to give Link this chance. She'd held back Apocalypse for 100 years, had endured isolation and constant struggle, had maintained faith that the hero she'd sent to sleep would wake and fulfill his role. The game's gentle pacing and freedom to explore could feel guilt-inducing after this memory. The knowledge that every hour spent cooking meals or hunting for Koroks meant another hour Zelda fought alone in the castle. The divine beasts provided Breath of the Wild's closest equivalent to traditional Zelda dungeons, though even these massive mechanical creatures represented radical reimagining of dungeon design. Each divine beast was a single, cohesive mechanism, a massive puzzle where solving challenges required manipulating the beast's orientation and mechanical systems. Vah-Ruta, the elephant-shaped divine beast corrupted in the Zora's Domain region, could manipulate water through its trunk. Vah-Rudania, the salamander divine beast at Death Mountain, could be rotated to change the flow of lava and orientation of its internal spaces. Vah-Medoh, the bird divine beast of the Rito, could be tilted to affect wind currents. Vah-Naboris, the camel divine beast in the Gerudo Desert, could spin its body sections independently to create new paths. The divine beasts were shorter than traditional Zelda dungeons, completable in an hour or two rather than the multi-hour investments previous games had demanded. But they compensated with mechanical ingenuity and emotional weight. Each beast came with a champion's spirit, the ghost of the pilot who had died when Ganon corrupted their divine beast a century ago. These spirits, Mipha of the Zora, Daruk of the Gorons, Revali of the Rito, Urbosa of the Gerudo, had been Link's companions 100 years ago. Their interactions with Link in the present, after he'd freed them from century-long torment, provided character moments that made the champions feel like real people rather than quest objectives. Mipha's story carried particular tragedy. The memory fragments revealed she'd loved Link, had crafted armor for him as a traditional Zora declaration of intent to marry, had been preparing to express her feelings when the calamity struck. Her death meant those feelings were never voiced, the armor never presented. Her spirit's gentle gratitude when Link freed her carried the weight of love that endured beyond death, of sacrifices made gladly for someone who might never have fully understood the depth of feeling behind them. Daruk's boisterous pride in his little buddy making good. Revali's continued prideful competitiveness, even in death, demanding Link acknowledge the Rito champion's superior skill while grudgingly respecting the hero's growth. Urbosa's maternal warmth, her promise to watch over Zelda even after death, her faith that Link would succeed where she'd failed. Each freed divine beast provided Link with a powerful ability. Mipha's grace to automatically revive him upon death, Daruk's protection to create a defensive barrier, Revali's gale to create updrafts for vertical travel, Urbosa's fury to call down devastating lightning strikes. More importantly, each freed beast aimed its divine weapon at Hyrule Castle, weakening Calamity Ganon's hold and making the final confrontation more survivable. The game allowed players to tackle the divine beasts in any order or skip them entirely if they wanted maximum challenge, but freeing all four provided both narrative closure for the champion's stories and practical assistance for the final battle. Hyrule Castle itself represented the game's ultimate expression of non-linear design. The castle was accessible from the beginning, visible from the Great Plateau, approachable from multiple directions. It wasn't a traditional final dungeon with a prescribed path from entrance to boss chamber. Instead, it was a massive, three-dimensional space filled with powerful enemies, environmental hazards, and dozens of paths leading to the sanctum where Calamity Ganon waited. Players could approach from the front gates and fight through the main courtyard. They could climb the external walls and enter through upper windows. They could swim through waterways or parasail from nearby mountains directly to higher levels. They could find secret passages through dungeons beneath the castle or navigate the library and castle rooms where remnants of the Old Kingdom's life remained preserved under corruption. The environmental storytelling in Hyrule Castle was extraordinary. Zelda's study contained her diary, entries revealing her frustration with her power's absence and her growing affection for Link. The training grounds showed where the royal guard had made their last stand. The dining hall held remnants of the final meal before evacuation. Princess Zelda's room was preserved almost untouched, a time capsule of the young woman who'd walked away from this life knowing she'd never return. The castle was a museum of the fallen kingdom, every room telling stories of what had been lost, what Zelda had fought to preserve, what Link was fighting to reclaim. The encounter with Calamity Ganon lacked the multiple dramatic phases and elaborate patterns that characterized previous final bosses. By the time players reached the sanctum, if they'd freed the divine beasts and collected substantial health and stamina upgrades, the fight was relatively straightforward. Calamity Ganon, rendered as a grotesque spider-like corruption of mechanical and organic matter, attacked with predictable patterns. The divine beasts automatically removed half his health at the battle's start. With preparation and skill, players could end the fight quickly and efficiently. Then came the transformation to Dark Beast Ganon on Hyrule Field, a massive boar form that was more spectacle than challenge, requiring Link to fire light arrows at weak points while riding horseback around the beast's perimeter. The anticlimactic nature of the final battles was deliberate design, rather than failure. Breath of the Wild's philosophy was that the journey was the destination, that the real game had been the hundreds of hours of exploration, experimentation, and discovery leading to this moment. The final battle was confirmation of growth rather than ultimate test. Players had become powerful through their choices and actions. They'd mastered the game's systems, collected resources, upgraded equipment, freed the divine beasts, grown from the confused warrior who awakened in the Shrine of Resurrection into a hero capable of ending a century of suffering. The final battles acknowledged this growth by being completable, without artificial difficulty spikes. Victory felt earned not because the final boss was challenging, but because of everything required to reach that boss in a state prepared for victory. The ending, with Zelda finally freed after 100 years of holding back darkness, was quiet and hopeful rather than triumphant. She and Link stood in Hyrule Field, near the ruins of the kingdom as the sun rose. Zelda spoke about what they would do next, how they would rebuild, how Hyrule could recover from its century of wounds. The tone was optimistic, but exhausted. Two people who had sacrificed everything, finally allowed to rest and imagine a future beyond constant struggle. The final shot showed them walking toward the ruins together, ready to begin the long work of restoration. It was gentle and understated, trusting that the emotional journey players had experienced through memories and exploration had created sufficient investment that quiet resolution would satisfy more than elaborate spectacle. Breath of the Wild's impact on the gaming industry was immediate and profound. The game received nearly universal critical acclaim, with review scores consistently at or near perfect across all major publications. It won numerous Game of the Year awards, including from the Game Developers' Choice Awards and the Game Awards. More importantly, it demonstrated that established franchises with decades of history could still reinvent themselves completely, could question their own foundations, and emerge with something that felt simultaneously fresh and faithful to original principles. The game sold over 30 million copies, making it by far the best-selling Zelda game in history and one of the most successful games on the Nintendo Switch. The influence on open-world game design became apparent in subsequent years as developers absorbed Breath of the Wild's lessons. The emphasis on player freedom over guided experience, the trust in player intelligence and curiosity, the environmental storytelling that rewarded observation rather than requiring explicit narrative delivery, the systemic design that created emergent gameplay rather than scripted encounters. These principles began appearing in games across genres and platforms. Developers recognized that players wanted to be trusted, wanted to discover rather than be told, wanted worlds that responded consistently to their actions rather than rigidly following prescribed scripts. Within the Zelda series, Breath of the Wild represented a dividing line between eras. Everything before it was retroactively classified as traditional Zelda, while everything after would need to reckon with the new paradigm. The game had proven that Zelda could exist without traditional dungeons, without the item gating progression structure, without the carefully scripted sequence of events that had defined the series since A Link to the Past. Future entries would need to decide whether to continue evolving in Breath of the Wild's direction or attempt to find a middle ground between the revolutionary new approach and the traditional elements that some fans missed. The debate about which approach was superior, whether Breath of the Wild's freedom or traditional Zelda's structured progression created better experiences, would rage throughout the community for years and likely would never fully resolve. The moment of emerging from the Shrine of Resurrection and seeing all of Hyrule spread before Link, the realization that any visible location could be reached through sufficient determination and creativity became emblematic of what the game represented. This was Zelda returned to its roots while simultaneously evolved beyond anything players had expected. The series that had been built on exploration and discovery had remembered why those principles mattered, had stripped away decades of accumulated conventions to reveal the essential elements that made Zelda special. The game that resulted was so confident in its vision that it gave players tools and freedom, then trusted them to create their own adventures within the systems it had built. Not every player would experience the same Breath of the Wild, would discover the same secrets in the same order, would approach challenges with the same strategies. That diversity of experience wasn't a bug, but the entire point, the understanding that the most memorable adventures are the ones players write for themselves through choices and actions rather than following paths someone else prescribed. The question that haunted Nintendo and the Zelda development team following Breath of the Wild's revolutionary success was simultaneously simple and daunting. How do you follow a game that had fundamentally redefined not just its own series, but influenced the entire open-world genre? The answer couldn't be simply making Breath of the Wild again with new shrines and different enemy placements. The philosophy that had driven that game's creation, the willingness to question every assumption and rebuild from first principles, demanded that the sequel be equally bold in its ambitions, even if those ambitions took the series in unexpected directions. The Legend of Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom released in May of 2023, after a development cycle that had been extended multiple times as the team pursued increasingly ambitious features. What began as plans for additional content for Breath of the Wild evolved into a full sequel that would expand the original game's world in 3 dimensions, adding entire new layers of exploration above and below the familiar Hyrule. The game retained Breath of the Wild's map as its foundation, but transformed how players could interact with that space through new abilities, new mechanics, and new systems that elevated player creativity to heights the previous game had only suggested. The opening hours established that this would be a darker, more mysterious story than its predecessor. Link and Zelda explored caverns beneath Hyrule Castle, investigating murals and evidence of an ancient civilization that had existed before even the kingdom's founding. They discovered a mummified corpse held in place by a glowing arm, clearly restrained by powerful magic that had kept it sealed for millennia. When Zelda attempted to examine the murals more closely, the mummy awakened. Malice erupted from the corpse as it reached out, disintegrating the Master Sword and infecting Link's arm with corruption. The cavern collapsed as the reanimated Ganondorf, for the mummy was revealed to be the Demon King from thousands of years past, broke free from his seal. Zelda fell into the darkness below, reaching for Link as she disappeared. Link dove after her but couldn't reach her, couldn't save her, his corrupted arm failing as he plummeted into the abyss. Link awakened on a sky island floating high above Hyrule, his corrupted arm replaced by an ancient prosthetic, his memories hazy about how he'd survived or reached this place. An ancient Zonai construct named Rauru explained that Link had been found near death, that the arm he now possessed had belonged to Rauru himself in ages past, that Zelda had vanished, and her location remained unknown. The Sky Islands represented remnants of an ancient Zonai civilization, floating archipelagos that had once been part of the surface world before being raised to the heavens in a cataclysm so old that even legends had forgotten the details. Link's new arm granted abilities derived from Zonai technology, powers that would prove essential for the journey ahead. The Sky Islands introduced verticality that made Breath of the Wild's climbing pale by comparison. Entire regions of explorable space existed above the clouds, connected by intricate networks of floating rocks, ancient structures, and air currents. Diving from these heights became a core mechanic, Link able to fall from Sky Islands and deploy his paraglider at any point, surveying the landscape below and choosing landing sites with complete freedom. The islands themselves ranged from tiny platforms holding a single shrine to massive structures containing elaborate puzzles, enemy camps, and environmental storytelling that revealed fragments of Zonai history. The sky wasn't just an addition to Breath of the Wild's world, but a complete second layer that tripled the explorable space. But the most dramatic expansion came from the depths, a massive underground realm that mirrored the surface world in reverse. Where Sky Islands floated above Hyrule, the depths sprawled beneath it, caverns and chasms creating a dark reflection of the world above. The depths were initially pitch black, requiring Link to throw bright bloom seeds to create temporary illumination or find light roots. ancient structures that created permanent zones of visibility to navigate safely. The darkness wasn't just atmospheric, but mechanical, obscuring enemies and environmental hazards while creating a sense of genuine danger and disorientation. Every chasm on the surface that Link could dive into led to the depths, and every light route below corresponded to a shrine above, creating a three-dimensional puzzle where understanding one layer helped navigate the others. The Zonai technology that Link accessed through his new arm transformed how players could interact with the world. The Ultra Hand ability allowed Link to grab and manipulate objects, but more importantly, it let him fuse those objects together to create custom constructions. Players could attach wheels to platforms to create vehicles, could attach fans to generate thrust, could combine weapons with monster parts to create hybrid tools, could build bridges from logs and stone slabs, could construct flying machines from wings and propellers and steering mechanisms. The only limitations were physics, available materials, and player imagination. The game provided some blueprint examples of proven designs, but experimentation was encouraged and rewarded. The viral spread of player-created Ultra Hand constructions became a cultural phenomenon. Videos circulated showing elaborate machines, walking mechs built from jointed parts, flying aircraft carriers constructed from dozens of components, automated mining rigs that collected resources without player input, combat vehicles bristling with weapons, traversal devices that trivialized environmental challenges through creative engineering. Some players ignored combat entirely in favor of construction, treating Tears of the Kingdom as an engineering simulator where the goal was elegance and efficiency of design. Others created deliberately absurd contraptions, seeing how convoluted or impractical they could make a functional device. The game accommodated all approaches, its physics engine robust enough to handle constructions the developers had never anticipated. This embrace of player creativity represented the fullest realization of Breath of the Wild's philosophy. That game had given players chemistry and environmental interactions, had allowed creative problem-solving within designed parameters. Tears of the Kingdom went further, providing tools that let players literally build their own solutions from components, that turned every challenge into an opportunity for unique approaches. Two players facing the same obstacle might create entirely different solutions. One building a flying machine to bypass it entirely, another constructing a bridge, a third using the Ascend ability to phase through solid surfaces and emerge above the problem, a fourth fusing weapons in creative ways to destroy obstacles. The game celebrated this diversity, never suggesting there was a correct answer, only that any answer that worked was valid. The Fuse ability extended this creativity to combat and exploration. Link could fuse almost any object to his weapons, arrows, or shields, creating combinations that modified their properties dramatically. Attach a boulder to a club, and it became a hammer with devastating impact. Fuse a monster horn to a sword, and it gained elemental properties. Attach eyes to arrows, and they homed in on targeted enemies. Fuse a mushroom that created an updraft to a shield, and blocking created a vertical launch. The combinations numbered in the thousands, and players delighted in discovering synergies the developers might not have explicitly designed. The system replaced Breath of the Wild's weapon durability, frustration with a mechanic that made every breakage an opportunity to create something new, rather than a loss of a valued tool. The memory system returned, but with a twist that elevated the storytelling to operatic tragedy. The dragon tears scattered across Hyrule contained geoglyph markers that, when discovered, revealed memories from the ancient past. But these weren't Link's memories, they were Zelda's, and they showed what had happened after she fell in the opening sequence. Zelda had been thrown back in time, landing in Hyrule's distant past during the era when the Zonai still walked the surface world, when King Rauru had sealed the demon king Ganondorf beneath the castle. She found herself stranded in a time before the kingdom she knew existed, unable to return to her own era, watching history unfold while knowing the terrible future that awaited. The memories showed Zelda's desperate attempts to find a way back to her own time, her gradual acceptance that she was trapped, her growing understanding of her role in events that had already happened from her perspective, but were unfolding in real time for everyone around her. She became an advisor to the ancient kingdom, using her knowledge of the future to help prepare for threats she knew were coming. She warned of Ganondorf's deception, helped establish the systems that would eventually guide Link in his quest thousands of years later. But she also knew that Ganondorf would eventually break free, that Rauru's seal would fail, that the calamity would come. History was written, and nothing she did in the past could prevent the future she'd already lived through. The final memory revealed Zelda's impossible choice. She discovered a way to help Link in the present, but it required a sacrifice that went beyond simply giving up her life. The ancient legends spoke of immortal dragons that soared through Hyrule's skies, beings of immense power whose origins were forgotten mysteries. Zelda learned the terrible truth. Those dragons had once been people who had consumed their secret stones, ancient Zonai artifacts that amplified power at the cost of transformation. Swallowing a secret stone granted godlike power for a brief moment before the person's consciousness dissolved, their body transforming into an immortal dragon that would exist for eternity without memory, identity, or awareness of what they'd once been. Zelda chose transformation, knowing it was permanent, knowing she would cease to exist as herself, knowing the dragon she became would have no awareness of the person she'd been or the people she'd loved. She did it anyway because the dragon would survive through the millennia, would carry something that Link desperately needed in his battle against Ganondorf, thousands of years in the future. The memory showed her standing on a precipice, the secret stone in her hand, Rauru and Sonia trying to talk her out of it, Zelda crying but resolute. She swallowed the stone. Golden light erupted, her body elongated, scales replacing skin, wings erupting from her back as her mind fragmented and dissolved. The light dragon that emerged had no memory of Princess Zelda, no awareness of the sacrifice that had created it, no understanding of the love that had motivated the transformation. It simply soared into the sky, beginning an existence that would last 10,000 years, waiting for the moment when Link would need what it carried. Discovering this truth transformed every previous encounter Link had with the light dragon throughout his journey. The mysterious golden dragon that had appeared in the skies after his awakening, that Link had perhaps seen soaring peacefully through clouds, that felt somehow familiar despite being an inexplicable presence. That was Zelda, transformed and lost, existing as an immortal being who no longer knew herself or him or anything beyond the simple drive to soar endlessly through Hyrule's skies. The tragedy was multi-layered. Zelda had made the choice knowing what it cost, had sacrificed not just her life, but her very self, and the dragon couldn't even understand what had been given up. Every moment Link had spent exploring, every side quest and shrine and leisurely activity while the light dragon flew overhead, had been time Zelda spent as a mindless creature, her identity erased, her sacrifice unacknowledged because recognition was impossible. The final confrontation with Ganondorf, when Link possessed the full truth, carried emotional weight that pure gameplay could never achieve. This wasn't just about defeating evil or saving the kingdom. It was about ending Zelda's suffering, about making her sacrifice mean something, about proving that what she'd given up hadn't been wasted on a hero who failed in his moment of greatest need. The Demon King fought with the power of ages, utilizing the abilities and forms accumulated across multiple incarnations. The battle was exhaustive and desperate, pushing Link to employ every skill and resource he'd gathered throughout his journey. Victory came at the moment of Zelda's restoration, with Ganondorf defeated and Rauru's spirit providing the final push of power, with Sonia's phantom joining her husband's to channel the forces necessary for a miracle. The light dragon's transformation reversed. 10,000 years as a mindless creature ended as golden light surrounded the dragon and condensed, scales becoming skin, wings folding back into arms, the massive serpentine form contracting to human proportions. Zelda fell from the sky, unconscious but restored. Her memories and identity returned, though she would carry no awareness of the millennia spent as a dragon. Link caught her, as he had failed to catch her in the cavern, this time succeeding, this time keeping hold, this time ensuring she was safe. The embrace between them after Zelda awakened was wordless, but spoke volumes, the kind of reunion that required no dialogue, because the emotions were too large for words. They had both endured impossible things, Link through a second world-threatening quest, Zelda through willing self-annihilation and 10,000 years of existence as something that wasn't her. The story ended with them together on the surface, Hyrule saved once more. The ancient threat finally ended not through sealing or temporary victory, but genuine defeat. The cycle that Demise's curse had established might continue in some distant future, but for now, in this moment, they had won completely. While Tears of the Kingdom represented the culmination of Breath of the Wild's revolutionary approach, other recent Zelda releases demonstrated the series' continued willingness to experiment across different scales and platforms. The Legend of Zelda. Link's Awakening, released for the Nintendo Switch in September of 2019, brought the beloved Game Boy title into the modern era with a complete visual overhaul. The remake transformed the original's sprite-based graphics into a toy diorama aesthetic, where characters and environments looked like detailed miniatures, everything rendered with a soft focus effect that made the island feel dreamlike and unreal in ways that served the story's eventual reveal. The remake stayed faithful to the original's dungeon design and puzzle solutions, while modernizing the interface and control scheme for contemporary players. The addition of a chamber dungeon mode, where players could create custom dungeons from rooms they'd cleared in the main game, provided new content while honoring the creative spirit that had always defined the series. More importantly, the remake introduced Link's Awakening to generations who had never experienced it, allowing them to discover why the surreal story of Koholint Island and its doomed inhabitants had resonated so deeply with players in 1993. The bittersweet ending, where awakening the windfish meant erasing the island and everyone on it from existence, hit just as hard in modern times as it had 3 decades prior, proving that genuinely affecting storytelling transcended graphical fidelity. The Legend of Zelda. Echoes of Wisdom, released in September of 2024, represented a milestone the series had approached but never quite achieved across nearly 4 decades: Princess Zelda as the playable protagonist. The game's opening showed Link rescuing Zelda in familiar fashion, only for the hero to be consumed by a rift to the still world, leaving Zelda to save both Link and Hyrule itself. The gameplay departed from traditional action-focused Zelda in favor of puzzle-solving and strategic thinking, with Zelda wielding the Tri-Rod to create echoes of objects and monsters she'd encountered. Rather than fighting enemies directly, Zelda summoned echoes of creatures to battle on her behalf, positioning herself as tactician and summoner rather than warrior. This shift in gameplay philosophy demonstrated that Zelda games could center different skills and approaches while maintaining the series' identity. Echoes of Wisdom emphasized intelligence and creativity over combat prowess, making Zelda's different capabilities from Link serve gameplay rather than simply narrative purposes. The game's success proved that the series could support different protagonists with different playstyles, that the Legend of Zelda as a concept was flexible enough to accommodate perspectives beyond the traditional hero's journey. Whether this represented a one-time experiment or the beginning of more varied protagonist choices in future entries remained to be seen. But the door had been opened to possibilities that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. As the series approached its 40th anniversary, The Legend of Zelda stood as one of gaming's most enduring and influential franchises. From the original game's revolutionary open exploration in 1986 through Tears of the Kingdom's unprecedented player creativity in 2023, the series had maintained relevance through constant evolution and willingness to question its own conventions. Each major entry had contributed something essential to gaming's vocabulary: the original's exploration philosophy, a link to the past's perfected structure, Ocarina of Time's 3D design solutions, Majora's Mask's temporal mechanics and tonal darkness, Wind Waker's artistic courage, Twilight Princess's emotional storytelling, Skyward Sword's origin mythology, Breath of the Wild's revolutionary freedom, Tears of the Kingdom's creative construction. The series had survived controversies that might have destroyed lesser franchises. Wind Waker's initial rejection taught the industry about the dangers of demanding fan service over artistic vision. Skyward Sword's motion control divisiveness demonstrated that innovative control schemes needed accessibility alongside ambition. Breath of the Wild's abandonment of traditional dungeons showed that sacred cows could be questioned if the result justified the heresy. Through each controversy, through each risk that divided fan bases and sparked passionate debates, the series emerged stronger because Nintendo consistently prioritized creative vision over playing it safe. The timeline debates, the endless discussions about which game was best, the arguments over whether traditional or open-world design served the series better. These conversations themselves testified to Zelda's cultural significance. People cared deeply because the games had given them experiences that mattered, memories that endured, moments that influenced how they thought about interactive entertainment. The first time they'd explored beyond the starting screen in the original game, the shock of the 7-year time skip in Ocarina, the oppressive countdown in Majora's Mask, the drowned Hyrule Castle in Wind Waker, Midna's farewell in Twilight Princess, Zelda's crystallized sleep in Skyward Sword, emerging onto the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, discovering Zelda's dragon form in Tears of the Kingdom. These moments lived in memory, alongside personal milestones, becoming part of players' life stories rather than simply gaming anecdotes. Looking forward, the series' future seemed simultaneously certain and unpredictable. There would be more Zelda games. That was assured by the franchise's commercial success and cultural importance to Nintendo's identity. But what those games would look like, what conventions they would maintain or abandon, what new innovations they would pioneer, these questions remained tantalizingly open. Would the series continue in Breath of the Wild's open-world direction or return to more structured experiences? Would traditional dungeons make a comeback, or had shrines and divine beasts permanently replace them? Would motion controls be revisited with better technology, or had that experiment concluded? Would other protagonists beyond Link receive their own games, or would Echoes of Wisdom remain a unique experiment? The only certainty was that whatever came next would surprise us, would challenge expectations, would prioritize creative vision over safe repetition. The Legend of Zelda had proven across 4 decades that its greatest strength wasn't any specific mechanic or structure, but the philosophy that drove its creation, the belief that games should trust player intelligence, reward curiosity, embrace risk, and never stop evolving. As long as that philosophy guided development, as long as the teams creating these games maintained the courage to question assumptions and rebuild from first principles, the series would continue producing experiences that defined not just what Zelda games could be, but what video games as a medium could achieve. The Legend of Zelda's influence on video games extends far beyond the boundaries of adventure titles or Nintendo's ecosystem. Across nearly 4 decades, the series has established design principles, storytelling techniques, and player-centric philosophies that have become so fundamental to gaming that their origins are sometimes forgotten. When developers discuss environmental storytelling, when they debate the merits of player freedom versus guided experience, when they consider how music can convey emotion without dialogue, when they question whether their game respects player intelligence, these conversations occur in a landscape that The Legend of Zelda helped shape. Understanding the series' legacy requires examining not just what these games achieved, but how they changed what the entire medium believed was possible. The innovation philosophy that has driven The Legend of Zelda since Shigeru Miyamoto's first sketches has become legendary within game development circles. Miyamoto's approach, sometimes called upending the tea table, involves questioning every assumption about how a game should work, refusing to accept convention simply because previous games established patterns. This philosophy manifested differently across each major entry, but the underlying principle remained constant. Comfort was the enemy of meaningful progress, and true innovation required willingness to alienate portions of the existing audience in pursuit of a vision that might not be immediately understood or appreciated. The original Legend of Zelda upended the tea table by rejecting the linear structure that defined contemporary games, trusting players to explore without explicit guidance. A Link to the Past did it by creating a dual-world structure that doubled content while serving narrative purposes. Ocarina of Time revolutionized 3D game design across multiple fronts simultaneously, establishing conventions that persisted for decades. Majora's Mask introduced the 3-day cycle and dared to make a Nintendo game genuinely dark and unsettling. Wind Waker pursued cel-shaded graphics despite violent fan opposition. Twilight Princess perfected the traditional formula while infusing it with unprecedented emotional depth. Skyward Sword rebuilt the game around motion controls and explained the series' mythological origins. Breath of the Wild questioned every assumption about what made a Zelda game and rebuilt from scratch around core principles rather than accumulated conventions. This consistent willingness to risk alienating fans in service of creative vision set The Legend of Zelda apart from franchises that carefully managed expectations and delivered iterative improvements rather than revolutionary changes. Many beloved series across gaming history have calcified into predictable patterns, each new entry a refinement of established formulas that satisfied existing fans while gradually losing the spark that had made the series special. The Legend of Zelda repeatedly demonstrated that the path to long-term relevance required short-term risk, that maintaining a passionate fan base sometimes meant disappointing portions of that fan base when their desires conflicted with creative evolution. The vindication of controversial choices, Wind Waker's art style aging beautifully, Breath of the Wild's abandonment of traditional structure influencing the entire industry, validated this approach and provided blueprint for how established franchises could remain vital across generations. The adventure game genre as it exists today was fundamentally shaped by design principles. The Legend of Zelda established and refined. The concept of the action-adventure game, combining real-time combat with exploration and puzzle-solving, existed before Zelda, but crystallized into recognizable form through the series' influence. The structure of acquiring items that opened access to new areas, the emphasis on environmental puzzles integrated into world design, the boss battles that required observation and pattern recognition rather than simple attrition. These became genre conventions because Zelda demonstrated their effectiveness so convincingly that countless developers adopted and adapted them. The influence extends across genres and platforms in ways that testimonials from developers make explicit. From Software's Hidetaka Miyazaki has discussed how The Legend of Zelda influenced Dark Souls' approach to environmental storytelling and exploration. The developers of Okami created what was essentially a love letter to Zelda's design philosophy. God of War's evolution into a more exploration-focused experience drew explicit inspiration from how Zelda games balance combat with puzzle-solving and world traversal. Indie titles like Hyper Light Drifter, Tunic, and Death's Door wear their Zelda influence openly, building on foundations the series established while pursuing their own unique visions. The term Zelda-like has become descriptor in indie game development, shorthand for a specific combination of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving that traces directly to the series' innovations. The lock-on targeting system that Ocarina of Time introduced as Z-targeting became so universally adopted that it's now difficult to find an action game that doesn't include some version of the mechanic. The context-sensitive action button that changed function based on what Link approached became standard interface design across the industry. The camera systems that Zelda games pioneered for 3D environments established conventions that persisted until developers found better solutions. These mechanical innovations spread through gaming like benevolent viruses, improving countless titles by providing solutions to problems every developer faced when transitioning from 2D to 3D gameplay. The approach to emotional storytelling that The Legend of Zelda refined across its history demonstrated that games could achieve genuine pathos without cinematic cutscenes or extensive dialogue. The series proved that a silent protagonist could be more emotionally effective than a voiced one. That player projection onto the character created investment no amount of scripted personality could match. Link's silence across most of the series' history wasn't limitation, but deliberate choice. Understanding that players' imagination of Link's thoughts and feelings would be more personal than anything writers could script. When emotional moments worked, Zelda's crystal sleep in Skyward Sword, Midna's farewell in Twilight Princess, the discovery of Zelda's dragon transformation in Tears of the Kingdom, they resonated precisely because players had filled Link's silence with their own emotional responses. The use of music as emotional language reached heights in Zelda games that few other series have matched. Koji Kondo's compositions for the series created melodies that transcended their original context to become cultural touchstones, recognizable even to non-gamers. The main theme from The Legend of Zelda, Zelda's Lullaby, The Song of Storms, Saria's Song, Dragon Roost Island, Midna's Lament, the Guardian Battle piano notes. These compositions conveyed emotion, established atmosphere, and created associations that endured for decades. The sophistication of musical storytelling evolved across the series from simple 8-bit melodies to full orchestral arrangements, but the fundamental understanding that music could carry narrative weight remained constant. Koji Kondo's genius wasn't just in composing memorable melodies, but in understanding how music could function as gameplay mechanic and emotional anchor simultaneously. The ocarina in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask wasn't just a tool for playing songs, but a means of expression. The melodies Link learned becoming part of his vocabulary for interacting with the world. The emotional associations players developed with these songs, learning Saria's Song as a connection to a lost friendship, playing the Song of Time to reset Majora's endless cycle, conducting the Wind Waker's baton to control weather and wind, made music active rather than passive, something players wielded rather than simply experienced. The evolution from simple chiptunes to full orchestral scores across the series' history charted gaming's growing ambitions and capabilities. The original game's overworld theme, composed under severe hardware constraints, achieved iconic status through sheer memorability and perfect association with the feeling of adventure. A Link to the Past's 16-bit compositions expanded the emotional palette while working within technical limitations. Ocarina of Time's soundtrack, composed for the Nintendo 64, utilized the system's capabilities to create music that felt orchestral despite being synthesized. Wind Waker's Celtic-influenced score matched its seafaring adventure aesthetic. Twilight Princess brought genuine orchestral recordings to portions of its soundtrack. Skyward Sword featured a fully orchestral score from beginning to end. Breath of the Wild pursued a minimalist piano-based approach that prioritized ambient environmental sound over constant musical accompaniment. Each game's musical identity served its specific needs, while contributing to the series' overall legacy as having some of gaming's most memorable and emotionally effective soundtracks. The courage to reinvent that defined the series' approach to each major entry provided a model for how franchises could maintain relevance across decades. Many beloved series have struggled with the tension between satisfying existing fans and attracting new audiences, between maintaining identity and allowing evolution. The Legend of Zelda navigated this tension by prioritizing creative vision over fan service, trusting that bold choices would eventually be vindicated even if initial reception was mixed. This approach required confidence and the backing of a company willing to absorb short-term criticism for long-term gains, but it resulted in a series that felt perpetually fresh rather than calcified into predictable patterns. The contrast with franchises that chose safety over risk illuminates why Zelda's approach proved successful. Series that released iterative sequels, maintaining established formulas, often found diminishing returns, each entry feeling increasingly redundant as the market moved forward. The Legend of Zelda's willingness to question its own conventions, to potentially alienate portions of its audience in pursuit of evolution, meant each major entry felt like an event rather than simply another release. Players approached new Zelda games with genuine curiosity about what risks Nintendo would take, what conventions would be maintained or abandoned, what new innovations would be pioneered. This anticipation was itself valuable, the understanding that Zelda games would surprise maintaining interest across the years between releases. Boss battle design, as established and refined across the Zelda series, influenced how developers approached climactic encounters across gaming. The three-phase structure that became standard after Ocarina of Time, a first phase teaching the boss's patterns, a second phase escalating difficulty and introducing new attacks, a third phase as a desperate final stand, provided a template that countless games would adopt. The integration of newly acquired items into boss strategies, requiring players to demonstrate mastery of tools just received, created satisfaction through immediate application of learned skills. The pattern recognition and timing requirements that made Zelda bosses feel like puzzles, as much as combat encounters established that fights could test intelligence alongside reflexes. The environmental integration that made many Zelda bosses memorable demonstrated how arena design could be as important as the enemy itself. Koloktos in the ancient cistern, utilizing the vertical space and requiring the whip to dismantle. Twinrova in Ocarina of Time, demanding reflection of elemental attacks between twins. Stalord in Twilight Princess, using the spinner in a circular arena. These battles succeeded because the spaces they occurred in were designed specifically to enable and constrain specific strategies. The lessons learned from how Zelda games approached boss encounters influenced action game design broadly, establishing that memorable fights required more than simply large enemies with extensive health bars. The cinematic presentation that evolved across the series established how games could create spectacle without sacrificing interactivity. The transition from Ganondorf to Ganon in Ocarina of Time, the multi-stage battle across different environments against Zant in Twilight Princess, the desperate castle escape following Ganondorf's defeat in Wind Waker, these moments felt epic because the games committed to their drama while maintaining player control throughout. The balance between maintaining gameplay and delivering cinematic moments influenced how other developers approached set pieces, demonstrating that scripted sequences could enhance rather than replace player agency when implemented thoughtfully. The timeline and lore that The Legend of Zelda accumulated across its history created one of gaming's most complex and debated mythologies. For decades, Nintendo maintained that each game was generally standalone, with connections between entries loose and interpretable. The release of Hyrule Historia in 2011, which provided an official timeline splitting into 3 branches after Ocarina of Time, gave structure to what had previously been ambiguous. The revelation that the series' timeline included a branch where Link failed against Ganondorf, that the Fallen Hero timeline contained multiple beloved entries, including A Link to the Past and the original game, demonstrated that Nintendo had been thinking about continuity even when they claimed otherwise. The debates about timeline placement, about how different games connected, about whether the chronology even mattered, these discussions testified to player investment in the series' world and mythology. Communities formed around timeline theories, fans creating elaborate charts attempting to connect every game into a coherent sequence. The ambiguity served the series by allowing each game to stand alone while rewarding those who wanted to find connections. When Breath of the Wild released with deliberate vagueness about its timeline placement, with references to multiple previous entries that seemed to contradict established chronology, it sparked renewed debate about whether the timeline was still canon or whether Nintendo was moving toward treating it as flexible mythology rather than fixed history. The approach to lore demonstrated how game series could build depth across multiple entries without requiring players to have experienced previous games. Each Zelda game was designed to be someone's first, with core concepts re-established and previous events referenced in ways that enhanced rather than confused. The eternal cycle of hero, princess, and demon king provided continuity across wildly different settings and time periods, the archetypal nature of these roles allowing infinite variations while maintaining thematic consistency. This balance between accessibility and accumulated depth influenced how other developers approached serialized storytelling, showing that long-running franchises could reward longtime fans without alienating newcomers. The cultural impact of The Legend of Zelda extended far beyond gaming into broader popular culture. The series' music was performed by orchestras worldwide, with official concert tours like The Legend of Zelda, Symphony of the Goddesses, bringing the soundtrack to concert halls across the globe. The visual iconography, the Triforce symbol, the Master Sword, Link's green tunic and cap, became recognizable far beyond gaming circles, appearing in fashion, art, and design contexts divorced from their original medium. The series had transcended its origins as video game franchise to become cultural touchstone, reference point that could be invoked with assumption of recognition. The cosplay community embraced Zelda characters with particular enthusiasm, with conventions worldwide featuring dozens of Links, Zeldas, and other series characters. The dedication displayed in these costumes, with fans creating elaborate armor, functional props, and screen-accurate details, testified to the emotional connections players had formed with these characters and worlds. The fan art community produced work ranging from loving recreations to radical reinterpretations, exploring aspects of the series that the games themselves could only suggest. Fan composers created arrangements of Zelda music spanning every genre from metal to jazz to classical, demonstrating the flexibility and strength of Koji Kondo's original compositions. The academic study of the legend of Zelda as text worthy of serious analysis demonstrated gaming's growing acceptance as legitimate artistic medium. Universities offered courses examining the series' design philosophy, narrative structures, and cultural significance. Scholarly papers analyzed everything from the gender dynamics in Zelda games to their engagement with mythology and folklore, to their mechanical innovations and influence on game design. The series served as case study for discussions about interactivity and storytelling, about how games create meaning through systems rather than just narrative, about the relationship between player agency and authored experience. This academic attention validated what players had long felt, that these games mattered, that they deserved serious consideration alongside other cultural artifacts that shaped how we understand creativity and expression. The franchise's financial success ensured its continuation, but also demonstrated that quality and innovation could be commercially viable, that treating audiences with intelligence and respect could result in sales rather than requiring lowest common denominator pandering. The Legend of Zelda games consistently sold millions of copies, despite, or perhaps because of, their willingness to challenge players and pursue creative visions that sometimes confused or frustrated portions of their audience. The series proved that casual and hardcore weren't useful categories, that games could be accessible to newcomers while offering depth that rewarded investment, that respecting player intelligence created audiences rather than limiting them. Looking toward the future, The Legend of Zelda's legacy seems secure, but its specific direction remains tantalizingly uncertain. The success of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom suggests the series will continue exploring open-world design and player freedom, but Nintendo's history of constant reinvention means nothing can be assumed. The question facing the series isn't whether it will continue. The commercial success and cultural importance guarantee future entries, but rather what form those entries will take, what assumptions will be questioned next, what innovations will define the next era of Zelda games. The possibility space is vast. Future games might return to more structured experiences, synthesizing Breath of the Wild's freedom with traditional dungeons' carefully designed challenges. They might push further into player creativity, expanding the construction systems Tears of the Kingdom introduced. They might explore different protagonists and play styles, building on echoes of Wisdom's demonstration that Zelda games can center characters beyond Link. They might pursue entirely new art styles, genres, or gameplay mechanics that would seem alien to current expectations, but would, in retrospect, feel inevitable given the series' history of bold reinvention. What seems certain is that whatever comes next will surprise us, will challenge expectations, will spark debates about whether it's really a Zelda game, before eventually being recognized as essential to the series' evolution. The pattern has repeated too consistently across too many entries to expect anything different. Each major Zelda game has faced skepticism, criticism, or controversy before its qualities became undeniable and its innovations were absorbed into gaming's common vocabulary. The next entry will likely follow this pattern, proving once again that the series' greatest strength isn't any specific mechanic or structure, but the philosophy driving its creation. the belief that games should trust player intelligence, reward curiosity, embrace risk, and never stop evolving. The moments that defined The Legend of Zelda, from the first screen of the original game through emerging onto the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, to discovering Zelda's dragon transformation in Tears of the Kingdom, share common threads. Despite their surface differences, they prioritized discovery over instruction, trusted players to be curious and intelligent, respected the medium's unique capabilities to create experiences impossible in other art forms. They understood that interactivity wasn't just a gimmick, but a fundamental tool for creating meaning and emotion, that giving players agency over their experience made victories more satisfying and losses more impactful than any amount of scripted drama could achieve. The series taught the gaming industry that innovation required courage, that evolution sometimes meant disappointing fans in service of larger vision, that the path to lasting relevance wound through risk rather than around it. It demonstrated that franchises could maintain identity while constantly reinventing themselves, that core principles mattered more than specific mechanics, that what made a Zelda game special wasn't dungeons or items or even Link himself, but the philosophy that players deserved, worlds that rewarded exploration, that respected their intelligence, that trusted their curiosity to drive engagement rather than relying on waypoints and constant instruction. As the series approaches 40 years since that first adventure on the Nintendo Entertainment System, as new generations discover these games and add their own memories to the collective mythology, The Legend of Zelda stands as testament to what gaming can achieve when creativity is prioritized over safety, when players are trusted rather than led, when evolution is embraced rather than feared. The defining moments we've traced across this journey aren't just highlights from beloved games, but proof points in an ongoing argument about what interactive entertainment can be, what it should aspire to, what it might yet become. The legend continues, not because Nintendo keeps making games with Zelda in the title, but because each entry, at its best, remembers why the series mattered in the first place, and finds new ways to express those timeless principles for new audiences and new technologies. The adventure never truly ends. It simply evolves, waiting for the next player to pick up the controller and discover what lies beyond the horizon. Reflection on the journey through Zelda's most defining moments reveals something profound about the nature of legends and the stories we carry with us. How a series about a hero in green, a princess of wisdom, and an eternal conflict between light and dark became something far greater, a testament to the power of interactive storytelling and fearless innovation. Each moment we've explored represented not just a great game, but a risk taken, a boundary pushed, a new possibility revealed for what this medium could achieve and express. From the original's revolutionary exploration in 1986 through Breath of the Wild's paradigm shift and Tears of the Kingdom's creative construction, Zelda has always been about courage. Not just Link's courage to face evil, but Nintendo's courage to reinvent, to surprise, to trust players with freedom and complexity. The moments that changed the series are the moments that changed gaming itself, proving that established franchises could question their own foundations and emerge stronger, that evolution required risk but delivered rewards impossible through safety. As players rest and drift toward sleep, they carry with them memories of adventures across Hyrule, Termina, the Great Sea, and beyond. Memories of discovering what lay beyond the next hill, of solving puzzles through experimentation, of forming connections with companions who felt real despite being pixels and code. The Triforce of power, wisdom, and courage resonates not just in the games, but in the philosophy that created them. The understanding that meaningful experiences require all three elements working in harmony. The legacy of these defining moments ensures that the legend continues, that each new generation will discover why these games matter, why they've endured, why they've influenced countless others who followed. The adventure never truly ends. It simply waits for the next hero to begin, for the next player to emerge from the shrine of resurrection, or the cave where an old man offers a sword, ready to discover what wonders and dangers lie ahead in a world that rewards curiosity and respects courage above all else.